Is everyone here? Oh, no. Okay. Do we have anyone online today? Nope. Okay. So we can skip that. Okay. In case of an emergency where we need to evacuate the building, I would like to direct your attention to the glass doors, and you sort of pass the post and you go down the stairs. If that's blocked for whatever reason, there are 4 exits here. Please walk calmly through the exits and find your way down a staircase. Taking an elevator is probably a bad idea if we get to that stage. I'd also like to highlight that there is a defibrillator at the end of the hall. So if you feel like you need it or you see someone that you think needs it, a quick run just down the hallway there. I would like to acknowledge that we're hosting today's council session on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I really do want to thank them for their generosity and their hospitality and the love and the care they show this land that we get to live, work, and play on. And like I always say, I think it's really incumbent upon us to unlearn what we've learned in the past and learn the true history as to what's happened on these lands. And if we do that, I guarantee you, we are going to build an incredibly bright future full of love, prosperity, and kindness for everyone, and going out way past 7 generations. I also do want to acknowledge our incredible team throughout the city of Vancouver. I know a lot of us in council have seen our team in action, and I can tell you we have amazing people at the city that work incredibly hard every single day, that really care about this place that we call home, and it's an honor to be working side by side with you. Now, on a somber note, I do want to take a brief moment to recognize that this Sunday, April the 28th, the city observes the day of mourning to pay respects, to remember team members who have been killed, injured, or who've suffered an occupational illness while working. Over the last year and a half being in this role, and I know I speak for all of my teammates on council, we've had, and there have been councillors here who've been here a lot longer, who have a lot of personal experiences, with people that they know, or seeing people here who have been killed on the job or who have been injured. And recently we don't, a lot of people don't even think about it. You see firefighters, for example, and when you dig a little deeper, we find out they've been wearing jackets that cause cancer. And since 2017, I think there's been 34 presumptive cases of cancer due to equipment and the workplace of the firefighters. And we can go on and on, throughout, our workspaces, but workspaces everywhere. And so I just want to let everyone know here that at the City of Vancouver, we take safety incredibly seriously. That's why, we now do an announcement on how to evacuate the building. We're investing in defibrillators, and we will continue to make sure that safety is at the forefront, because at the end of the day, everyone's someone's mom or dad or partner or parent, sister, brother, sibling. We want to make sure everyone gets home safely every single day. That's something that everyone deserves. So to honor these team members, WorkSafe BC, the BC Federation of Labour, and the BC or the Business Council of BC are coordinating this year's memorial service at Jack Pool Plaza on Sunday at 10:30 a.m. And this year, because the day of mourning is on Sunday, the city will also recognize this day on Friday, April the 26th, where we're all encouraged to observe a minute of silence at 11 a.m. And the flag at City Hall will be flown at half-mast, and a commemorative wreath will be placed at the north steps of City Hall. So, just a small way of honoring our teammates. So with that, can we please get a roll call?
Mayor Sim in the chair, Councillor Carr, Councillor Kirby-Young, Councillor Dominato, Councillor Bly, Councillor Boyle, Councillor Fry. Councillor Montague is on a leave of absence all day for personal reasons. Councillor Klassen.
Present.
Councillor Meisner is on a leave of absence for personal reasons all day. Councillor Joe.
Present.
You have quorum. Mayor
Great.
Sim.
Thank you very much. All right, the plan for today. I hope everyone's excited about the playoffs here. It's game 2 today. That is all. Oh, funny joke. I'm not a comedian. Okay, we actually have some business going on as well. That went over just like my Chinese New Year brother joke every year. Anyways. There, Councillor Bly's laughing. All right, any comments on agenda items can be sent to council using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be posted on X at Van City Clerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's longstanding commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including the utmost respect for all genders. I remind council that when addressing speakers and the city's team members, we will avoid using gendered honorifics and will instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. Today, we have 3 administrative items: in-camera motion, adoption of minutes, and matters adopted on consent, 5 reports and 5 referral reports, 26 bylaws, 6 administrative motions, notice of council member motions, new business, and inquiries and other matters. So the plan for today is we'll break at noon for lunch, followed by the in-camera meeting, return at 3 p.m. to continue to deal with the remainder of the agenda, and if needed, recess at 5 p.m. for a dinner break and reconvene at 6 p.m. to complete the agenda. In camera, council is required to meet in camera later this week. The reasons and authority under the Vancouver Charter are listed in the updated agenda. Would someone like to move a motion to go into in camera later this week? Great, thank you, Councillor Klassen, seconded by Councillor Dominato. All those in favor say yay. All those opposed say nay. Great, the motion carries unanimously. Minutes 1 are from the Auditor General Committee on April the 4th, 2024. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Okay, would someone like to move adoption? Great, Councillor Joe and seconded by Councillor Kirby Young. All those in favor say yay. All those opposed say nay. Great, the motion carries unanimously. Minutes 2 are from the council meeting on April the 9th, 2024. Are there any corrections to the minutes? No. Would someone like to move? Councillor Bly, seconded by Councillor Kirby Young. All in favor say yay. All opposed say nay. Great, carries unanimously. Minutes 3 are from the public hearing on April the 9th, 2024. Are there any corrections? No, moved by Councillor Klassen, seconded by Councillor Carr. All those in favor say yay. All those opposed say nay. Great, the motion carries unanimously. Minutes 4 are from the council meeting following the Standing Committee on Policy and Strategic Priorities on April the 10th, 2024. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Would someone like to move? Councillor Joe, thank you. Councillor Boyle, I think I saw. No, Dominato, thank you very much. All those in favor say yay. All those opposed say nay. Great, the motion carries unanimously. Council will now consider matters adopted on consent. We have reports 1, 2, 3, and 5, and referral reports 1, 2, 5 on the consent agenda for council's consideration. We'll hold a report number 4 to hear from speakers. Council may adopt the recommendations for reports 1, 2, 3, and 5, and referral reports 1 through 5 on consent. Does any member wish to hold any of the items for debate or questions to team members? Councillor Carr. Okay. So, response to new provincial legislation, report 1 by Councillor Carr. Seeing no one else on the queue, does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on the consent items? No? Okay, so we have reports 2, 3, and 5, and referral reports 1 through 5 for the consent approval. Would someone like to move adoption of the recommendations before council contained?
Second.
Councillor Dominato moved it, and Councillor Klassen seconded it. Thank you. All those in favor say yay.
Yay.
All those opposed say nay. Great, the motion carries unanimously. Okay, so the following have been approved on consent. So report number 2, housekeeping and miscellaneous changes to the building bylaw. Report number 3, flag civic protocol policy amendments. Report number 5, funding application to disaster risk reduction climate adaptation program. And referral report number 1, CD-1 rezoning 1805 Victoria Drive. Report number 2, CD-1 rezoning 8815 to 8827 Selkirk Street. Report number 3, CD-1 rezoning 5350 to 5430 Heather Street. Referral report number 4, rezoning 4635 through 4675 Arbutus Street. Referral report number 5, CD-1, rezoning 130 through 150 West Broadway and 2520 Columbia Street. Oops. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so the first report we have, oops, sorry, advance. Okay, so the first report we're going to cover is report number 1, response to new provincial legislation, bills 44, 46, and 47. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on this item? All right, seeing none, this item has a presentation and we have team members here to present this item. Doug, go ahead.
All right, good morning, Mayor and Council. First off, I love the t-shirts. Good to see. My name is Doug Smith. I'm the acting general manager of planning, urban design, and sustainability. And today we will be providing you a presentation and report related to the provincial changes to the Vancouver Charter, specifically around bills 44, 46, and 47. This report is for information only and is in preparation for additional reports that will be seeking your direction coming this May and June. These bills require significant changes in planning authorities under the Vancouver Charter. These include changes in how the city will be required to plan for growth, to meet our housing needs, while also changing our development financing powers. The changes present opportunities for increased housing supply while safeguarding job spaces, and because they apply province-wide, they represent a significant step towards achieving a regional fair share distribution of housing. While the city is already a leader in housing delivery and has ongoing programs aligned with and even surpassing the objectives of this new legislation, in some cases, it imposes additional restrictions, new planning processes, and new tools, which now must be integrated into our work. This has required a reprioritization of our existing work plan, which we have done to minimize disruption to council priorities and major initiatives currently in progress. You will be seeing an overview of these changes today and more details to come. Templar Sang Trinai-Stitch has been leading this work for the City of Vancouver, and I will now invite him up to the podium to give you a detailed presentation.
Well, Mayor and Council, I'm just going to get my presentation loaded for you. Should be there. Thank you very much. Today's presentation that we'll go through today is our response to the provincial legislation on bills 44, 46, and 47. My name is Templar Sang Trinai-Stitch. I'm the issues manager in the planning department. Just to give you a brief overview, so we'll go through an introduction on the 3 bills that were introduced in the fall, as well as an overview on some of the impacts on our housing supply and some of our housing programs underway. I'll give you a deep dive on Bill 44, which is relating to housing needs report, zoning, and small-scale housing. Bill 46, which speaks to development financing tools, including ACCs and DCLs, as well as Bill 47 on transit-oriented areas, and provide a bit of an overview on implementation strategy and next steps to the work plan. So as you will recall, in November 2023, the province introduced 3 pieces of legislation aimed at increasing housing supply, as well as the creation and introduction of new or expanded development financing tools to support the delivery of that housing. And while the legislation did cover both the local government area, municipalities, and Vancouver Charter, the purpose of this presentation is to focus on the Vancouver Charter and the Vancouver context, and there are some differences between the two in the legislation. So as I mentioned, Bill 44 is the housing statutes one. We've received some of the regulations and manuals associated with it. We have not yet seen the regulations on the housing needs report components and the methodology associated there too. We've received some of the guidelines, interim guidelines in development financing, but not all of the regulations and not the full technical guidelines, which we expect later this year. And on the transit-oriented items, we did receive regulations in December, as well as a TOA manual in December, which was then replaced and updated with an additional addendum in March this year as well. At the time of writing this report and this presentation, we haven't yet received the rest, but we have received additional legislation in the forms of Bill 11, 16, and 18, which I'll touch on at the back end of this presentation as well, which also relate to housing delivery and housing objectives. So a quick overview on the impacts of our housing supply. The next few slides will really be touching on some of the work that's underway and how this connects with all of the impactful efforts that were underway already. So, oops, back up one. So just quickly here, you might recall here the Housing Vancouver strategy, and Bill 44, 46, 47 include significant changes in our planning authorities under the Vancouver Charter, as it introduces how the city is required to plan for growth, meet our housing needs, as well as expanding those development financing growth powers. The amendments present an opportunity to increase the housing supply, safeguard against job space, and coupled with the Housing Supply Act from last year and the Housing Target Order that we received in September, represents a significant step towards achieving a regional fair share distribution of housing supply. And these three pieces of legislation generally align with the Vancouver housing strategy priorities around shifting towards rental and non-market housing, protecting, retaining existing rental stock, while also supporting residents in the community and encouraging more housing options across the city. The legislation also aligns with the general intent and direction of the Vancouver Plan, which was adopted by Council in 2022. And while the city is a leader in housing delivery and ongoing initiatives align or surpass much of the objectives of this new legislation, the legislation in some cases proposes additional restriction, new planning processes and tools, which we must now consider and implement. This will necessitate an evaluation of a work plan, as Doug mentioned to you earlier, which I'll be touching on a little bit later as well. So this slide is just a little bit of a snippet that the public will see shortly. This is a summary of our 2023 housing delivery in terms of our housing report out that we'll do annually. Over the past 10 years, Vancouver's been steadily increasing its annual supply and shifting towards rental. And this has largely been possible through the work of this council and past councils around the creation of community plans, major projects, rental incentive programs like secured rental policy, MERP, and other below market rental projects and policies. Last year, for evidence there, we certainly did surpass our target, which is established in the Housing Vancouver strategy from 2017. Those targets are about 72,000 units per year. We did a little over 7,800. The vast majority of that was rental, which was very exciting to see, and half of that rental was delivered through the secured rental policy. Notably, change and dip in terms of the colors on the graph is strata. So the peachy beige color there on the screen is a significant drop in what we typically see, and that's largely due to factors outside of the city's control relating to the market, interest rates, and construction costs, which is a bit of a segue into our next slide. So ensuring all homes and get built is actually something that requires more than just the city. The city certainly has the most control over the approvals, over the policy that gets set, but the actual delivery and completion of a project ranges to a number of other factors beyond the municipal control, including funding, financing, construction costs and supply, availability of labor and trades, as well as the interest rate environment that we're currently experiencing. This requires multi-level funding from governments, including the federal government, provincial government, and ourselves, together with other partners, to help ensure that these homes go from approval to built. This progress report that will be coming out later this spring will include an overview and a summary of the actions, and our housing team will be providing more information on that later this year. And so part of this effort that we're looking at now is making sure that our next Housing Vancouver strategy, our 3-year action plan, and the work associated with meeting our housing needs now aligns with this legislation as well. A quick shift into Bill 44. So as I mentioned before, Bill 44 focuses on expanding housing opportunities and housing requirements. The intent of the legislation is generally twofold. One is to support communities in delivering homes where people need options for housing or different options for housing, and it's called small-scale multi-unit housing by the province, lovingly called SMA. It's a provincial-wide requirement that I'll touch on in a bit more detail. The second bit of the legislation is around speeding up the approval process by front-loading that planning process, requiring housing needs reports, alignment with official community plans, official development plans, and zoning to give effect to those as well. As I mentioned, we have received some of the regulations and policy manuals, but not all of it. And this legislation comes with specific deadlines for which the municipalities must conform to that legislation. For the small-scale housing, we must give effect to the legislation by introducing bylaws on restricted zones. More on that in a few slides. By June 30th, the housing needs report in terms of an interim report is required by the end of this year, and we're on track to do that as well. And our zone capacity analysis has to be completed and verified by the end of 2025 as well. So just a couple key components and some next steps on all of these, and I mentioned on them a couple on the last slide, but the housing needs report is basically a plan for 5 and 20-year housing needs for the city. The interim housing report is required by the end of this year, and a final report that has more content and more process requirements is due by the end of 2028. Our staff are working on that right now, and as I mentioned, you'll see some more information from our housing team in the spring. We are looking for more clarification from the province around how the methodologies of the Housing Supply Act and Housing Target Order align and meet up with the expectations of the Housing Needs Report, and we're certainly in continued engagement with the province on that and expect to see more information in May or June. There are some limitations on the legislation. The legislation currently says that density bonusing can't be used to achieve our housing needs. This is certainly a bit of a concern for the city in terms of our ability to achieve those housing needs. We rely heavily on density bonusing and other tools to achieve those housing needs, so that's further clarification we're seeking from the province. The zone capacity analysis due within a year after the housing needs report is intended to be an exercise for the city to confirm that we have sufficient land zoned to meet those housing needs. And again, we're working with the province around what that methodology looks like. That doesn't necessarily mean we must go pre-zone or identify more changes in zoning. The first step is, can we meet our housing needs under current zoning? And if not, then where should we go in pre-zone? And that doesn't preclude the city from going above and beyond that and pre-zoning more lands as well. On the small-scale housing piece, as I mentioned, this is also a requirement mandated by the province to introduce this bylaws to give effect to this by June 2024. You'll see in a few slides that after going through this exercise, the first step in that exercise is identifying what are restricted zones. We've identified a few RT zones as well as First Shaughnessy District, and we're on track to implement this schedule by the end of June as well. Just a quick bit on missing middle and the work that the city has already embarked on and seen some great success on to date. So much of the provincial structure is based on what is missing middle. It's duplexes, it's fourplexes, townhouses. It's a range of that mid-rise, mid-level product before you get into apartments and beyond single-family zoning. And it's an opportunity to expand that housing option to create more housing solutions for local communities while still being able to respect the character and scale of development in those communities. And the city is certainly a provincial leader in this as well. In September, after about an 18-month process going through our consolidation of the RS zones into R11, Council adopted the missing middle multiplex form of zoning affecting almost 65,000 lots. To date, since the applications started coming in, we've received about 120 applications representing over 500 units, and that's just in the first 4 months of the program as well. So we're quite excited to see the results that are coming through from that program. Just switching gears back to Bill 44 on the small-scale multi-unit housing legislation. So as I mentioned, this introduces requirements into the charter to which we must now conform to. As I mentioned, the first bit is to identify those restricted zones, which I'll touch on the next slide. And once a restricted zone has been identified, there's now minimum requirements for that lot. So there's a minimum of 3 housing units required on lots that are less than 280 square meters or about 3,000 square feet. And on lots that are larger than that threshold, you're required to provide up to 4 units on that lot. Where there's a lot that's within 400 meters of a prescribed bus stop, and so that's a bus stop that meets a certain definition of 15-minute service generally, we're required to provide up to 6 units on that lot, on those larger lots over 280 square meters. And the legislation also prohibits council from holding a public hearing for the sole purpose of considering these required changes. Just switching on to some more details on it. As with all legislation and all policy, there's often comes with exemptions and restrictions. I won't go through all of them in detail, but there's a handy flow chart that the province has introduced through the manual. But effectively, lands that are hazardous or within agricultural or outside of an urban containment area are exempt. Lands protected under the Heritage Conservation Act or designated by bylaw prior to December 7th are protected and exempt from the legislation. And also significantly large parcels, so over 4,000 square meters, are also exempt. There's a few other restrictions that are at play around the use of density bonusing, no minimum off-street parking requirements, that the small-scale legislation is not applicable to lands within transit-oriented areas with the intention of trying to encourage more heightened density in those transit-oriented areas. And there's certainly design considerations that can be factored in and included. For example, the manual gets into some detail about, what the province suggests are potential ranges of heights and densities and coverage and setbacks, and those are certainly things that municipalities can consider when creating their own bylaws. So what is a restricted zone? Just paraphrasing, a restricted zone is a zone that as of December 7th permitted only a single family home or duplex as well as additional dwelling units or second suites. So think of it as one or two primary dwelling units and one or two additional dwelling units or second suites. So we must consider that on the date that that legislation came into effect, and the basic test that we're currently working with that we're still reviewing is if you have 3 principal dwelling units, so before duplex is 2 principal dwelling units, if you have 3 principal dwelling units or more, that would get you out of being a restricted zone, and you would be not a restricted zone. So going through that methodology and the other exemptions that I mentioned before, we've gone through all the RT zones, we've gone through Southlands, and we've gone through First Shaughnessy District and the R11. So given R11 has sufficient housing options and was adopted prior to royal assent, R11 is exempt from the legislation as it's not a restricted zone. A number of the other RT zones enable sufficient housing options that already meet or exceed the requirement of that threshold. And other lands like Southlands are outside an urban containment boundary or within floodplain and are otherwise exempt. There's a couple RT zones that are wholly contained within a TOA and exempt, so that really leaves us with 2 RT zones being RT7 and RT9, as well as First Shaughnessy District. That would be considered restricted under the legislation and must be updated to conform to the legislation. I will note, generally though, on First Shaughnessy District, notwithstanding it is within a Heritage Conservation Area ODP, that is not the same as the exemptions as I mentioned on the last slide. The exemptions relate to land, specific lots that are designated for heritage or are designated through the Heritage Conservation Act. And First Shaughnessy's district is not under the Heritage Conservation Act. It's through an ODP, a different section of the charter, though there are some lots that are designated and protected under the legislation. This is just a handy little map to show you as an overview of where all the RT and FSD zones are relative to the transit-oriented areas. And here's just a handy map that, again, at this scale, it's a little bit harder to see, but we've had to go about mapping where all the frequent bus transit routes are within 400 meters, and you can see much of the city is blanketed with that once you add the 400 meters on it, just reflective of the extensive bus network that we have here in the city. Zooming in just a little bit more, this is a close-up of the affected zones, so RT7, RT9, and FSD. So the orangey color is the RT7. There's 2 pieces. RT9 is the purple up at Kitts Point, and FSD is First Shaughnessy District is in the central there as well. So a few things that we're still looking at beyond what is a restricted zone is exploring the number of lots. So currently, as I mentioned, the legislation requires up to 6 units per lot within 400 meters. But as you can see here through some of these mapping, about 60% of FSD is covered with that. About half of RT9 is covered with that. All of RT7 is captured effectively within 400 meters. So some of the things we're looking at is whether or not we can just expand the up to 6 units on all lots across the board, just to help reduce complexity in the regulations and create more housing options across the board as well. We're still exploring whether or not lots within a TOA can be zoned or changed to increase missing middle housing options separate from other TOA legislation and regulations. And as I mentioned, currently there's no work plan at the moment to explore expanding these options or other missing middle options to the other RT zones. Again, this effort for June was simply about trying to conform on that schedule to the legislation. So just in terms of next steps on Bill 44, what the staff are looking to do is we are bringing forward a report recommendation in June that will look to meet the minimum requirements of the legislation and identify and include those restricted zones as we talked about. We are not seeking an extension to that deadline. There is an option to extend that deadline, but it's very focused on the need for infrastructure capacity concerns. And right now, what we're looking at doing is effectively modeling an R11 approach, which has a 1 FSR cap associated with the permissions for missing middle, which helps us address the infrastructure issues that we would otherwise have or could be exposed to in some of these areas that are older and aging infrastructure. As I mentioned, a public hearing is not required regarding changes to zoning to give effect to the legislation, but there are other zoning changes and other modifications happening that will necessitate a public hearing. As I mentioned, changes to the Heritage Conservation Area ODP. We're exploring some density bonusing options to encourage more density and more larger units within some of these zones, as well as some of the other changes to expand and allow 6 units on all lots, regardless of being within 400 meters or not. So though there might be a public hearing, there's going to be a split of what you can actually talk about, or what you must do under the legislation versus items that are for consideration that are over and above the legislation and would be the topic of the public hearing as well. We're going to be reporting back to the council on the parking bylaw updates, and this will include not just regulatory changes associated with small-scale housing, but also TOAs, and I'll jump on that in a couple of slides to come as well. Unfortunately, as part of the work and the effort, the staff that were otherwise focusing on reporting back on the R11 changes that you made last September to expand floor space exclusions and character retention had to be delayed. It was the same staff working on this, so we've had to prioritize this work over that. So that work will be put back on the work plan for later this fall as well. Shifting gears into Bill 46, which is all about development financing. As I mentioned, there's 2 main purposes and intents of the legislation. One is to expand the eligible infrastructure categories for development cost levies, and the second is to create a new amenity cost charge framework and contribution system, which is very similar to a DCL, where you can provide cash or in-kind delivery of amenities as well. As I mentioned, we've got some of the regulations and manuals, but not all of them, and we're expecting more and continue to work with the province on that. There is no mandated timeline to actually conform to this legislation. It's an enabling legislation, so it's really at council's discretion to implement it, and we're on track for a work plan to bring forward reports and information and ultimately recommendations in 2026 to align with our otherwise scheduled updates for our DCL bylaw, as well as our capital planning initiatives. So it's going to be very important to align all of that other work as well. A few key components, just for a bit more details. What the legislation does on DCLs is it expands, as I mentioned, to include new services, including fire protection, police, civic infrastructure associated with provincial highways. So think curbs and bike lanes and sidewalks associated with and around provincial highways, as well as solid waste and recycling facilities. We do require further conversation with the city or with the province on this. In the report, we speak to the notion of there's a cap that's currently established on the DCL, where the DCL can't exceed more than 10% of the value of the project. And you can imagine as you start adding more uses and services to it, coupled with some of the other constraints I'm going to talk about on ACCs, there's going to be increased pressure to rely on the DCL to do more, which is going to put upward pressure on hitting that threshold. And I can tell you over the last year or so, we have hit that threshold on a couple projects, and we have had to forego revenue from the DCL as a result of that. So there's ongoing discussion with the province about how to manage that while still being able to collect growth-related costs to help support growth. On the establishment of the ACC framework, this is a significant change in the legislation, wherein there is no legislation effectively to give effect to CACs, community amenity contributions. ACCs, on the other hand, we now have legislation and secures the ability to fund and deliver more soft services and other services and infrastructure separate from the DCL. Some of the concerns we have on this, though, is that housing and childcare is not considered an amenity, quote unquote, as defined by the legislation. Currently, the City of Vancouver structure is we have replacement housing under the DCL, we have childcare under the DCL. Historically, we've used CACs to help backfill and support that. We also now have, through Bill 16, which has not yet received royal assent, the ability for inclusionary zoning to help deliver housing, as well as density bonusing where we can secure other amenities as well. So this is going to be very important to help calibrate all of those tools, DCLs, CACs, ACCs, inclusionary housing, density bonusing, to help make sure that we can secure the right housing, the right infrastructure, the right amenities to support growth while still being able to encourage growth and not preventing growth from occurring. This brings us just to a quick summary about what our capital infrastructure delivery looks like, and you'll be seeing more information in the coming months around this as well. But we have a capital plan. It was adopted and goes through till 2026. It's a 20 to 30 year forecast around how, it's based on a 20 to 30 year forecast about how we expect to grow over that period. And those growth projections were not based on or it didn't have regard for this new legislation. So with new housing targets and housing needs to meet, we'll be reviewing a lot of those growth expectations. And this need for a comprehensive approach is evident around how these all connect. So it's for us to basically align with the legislation, we need to understand our housing needs. We need to give effect to those through the official development plans for the city, being Vancouver Plan. We need to make sure we've got enough zoning to give effect to that. We need to calibrate our development financing tools and align those with our service plans, our public benefit strategies, and our service level expectations, all of which will inform our capital plan for the next 4 years, which will be a 2027 to 2030 period as well. And the last bit I'll mention here is within our current capital plan, a little less than half of the money funding out of the capital plan is coming from development contributions. The other, 54% is a mix of partner contributions, tax base, user fees, and other revenue sources. This chart is really just to help provide council and the public with a bit of an overview of what are the differences between these different development tools. So think generally DCLs and CACs apply across the city, but only on net new growth. CACs are only effectively on rezonings. Density bonusing applies only when the developer elects to use the density bonusing option within a prescribed zone. And ACCs, as I mentioned, are also across the board on all net new growth. So it doesn't matter if it went through rezoning or not. Any net new growth delivered through a DP and building permit would contribute to the future ACC framework that is yet to be established and determined. Important to note are the different allocations between the amenities. As I mentioned before, the notion of and the requirement of the province here is to not cross-pollinate. They want to create separate categories of uses. So parks, childcare, housing replacement, transportation, utilities, and then the new additions of fire, police, and solid waste are under the DCL. Whereas ACCs, for example, are focusing more on other community-serving uses like community centers, rec centers, arts and cultural facilities and libraries, and other social facilities that are otherwise not funded by the DCL. So it's to help bridge the gap of what is otherwise not included in there. And as I mentioned, we're still carefully assessing Bill 16 and how we can start looking and using more of inclusionary and density bonusing obligations as well. As I mentioned before, this is all very much connected and the need tying into how we view service levels. In order for the city to adopt an ACC bylaw, we must establish city service levels to inform the type and the need of the amenities. Once we identify those needs, we can start confirming what amenities specifically we'd like to see in the community to support that growth. That requires updates to PBS or citywide PBS to help inform the creation of that charge. So think of an ACC similar to a DCL in which you've got the cost of amenities divided by the growth equals the cost of the charge. And that's the basic formula, but there's a lot of work that needs to go into it and why it's on our work plan for the next 2 years as well. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, we're waiting for more information from the province on the regulations and manuals, some of which we're expecting this spring and summer. On the ACC policy framework, we're going to be starting to scope and do the background work, including that public investment strategy and public investment framework. We're going to be starting to develop some of the forms and analysis and the technical work going into that, and optimizing the city's financing growth tools to help align with the different legislation. We'll be doing that comprehensive growth update, financing growth update in 2026, which will ultimately lead to reports to the council on what our citywide growth forecast and capital program would look like, the introduction of that ACC framework and bylaw, updates to our DCL to include those new allocation categories, and again, calibrating and fine-tuning those other tools, as I mentioned, density bonusing and inclusionary housing, to ensure that that development is still feasible and can continue to proceed while delivering the amenities we're looking for. In the interim, there's no restriction on the continued use of CACs for rezoning. So our CAC policy still applies on rezoning applications. So where we have target CACs or where projects are exempt, that'll continue. And where they're negotiated on some of the larger, more complex sites, we'll continue to do that as well. And all of this will be, as I mentioned, integrated into our next capital plan program that will come to council before this term ends as well. I'll change gears now into Bill 47. Bill 47 is the transit-oriented areas development. And so this legislation requires governments to designate areas near transit station as transit-oriented areas. Staff generally support the establishment of the TOAs. They largely focus and fall within our community plans or future community plans. So the notion of increasing heights and densities in and around transit areas are certainly supported in a general fashion. There's certainly some implementation challenges that we're going to be working through, and we'll get into in a couple details in the slide. There's 29 TOAs that affect the City of Vancouver, 25 rapid transit stations within the City of Vancouver boundaries, 2 bus stations, and 2 cross-boundary ones that just encroach in from Richmond and from Burnaby as well. We've got some updated policy manuals, as mentioned, in March, and there's a legislative deadline to bring forward these TOA bylaws and maps for council consideration before the end of June. Just as a quick overview of what the legislation seeks to do, as I mentioned, it requires municipalities to adopt those bylaws, and we're preparing a report for June to do just that. This important substantive aspect of it is that it also restricts council's authority on making decisions. And so the important language in that legislation is council must not prohibit or restrict a proposal based on the heights and densities as prescribed by the legislation. Having said that, it does not preclude council from the ability of conditioning a project or requiring certain aspects or restrictions on a project, and you can refuse an application on other matters as well. So it really only prohibits and restricts based on that height and density, and we can touch on that a bit more detail in the coming slides. Just moving along, it also the legislation also creates regulations, again, around the designation, what those rings look like and those concentric circles look like, as well as a policy manual for which council must consider when considering a rezoning application. And we'll touch on this a bit later, but we're looking at additional implementation guidance from council in the form of a rezoning policy to help bridge the gap of where the policy doesn't quite go far enough to help inform rezoning applications. The last bit of the legislation is it requires council to update its parking bylaw to eliminate off-street parking minimums for residential uses. There's still a requirement for providing parking for non-residential uses, as well as accessibility. And I'll touch on that in a bit more detail in terms of where this is going. But we're looking to bring that report back to council also in June as well. So the regulations established by the province through the TOA legislation created effectively several tiers, but the ones that affect the City of Vancouver are the 2 on the screen. So within 800 meters of a rapid transit station, there's three kind of tiers or rings. So within 200 meters, the minimum FSR and heights are 5 FSR and up to 20 stories. Between 200 and 400, it's 4 FSR and 12 stories. And between 400 and 800 meters, it's 3 FSR and up to 8 stories. Whereas the bus exchanges are basically a tier down from that. Within 200 meters, it's 4 and 12, respectively. And then between 200 meters and 400 meters, it's 3 FSR and 8 stories. Just to give you some comparison, so what staff have started looking at doing is just analyzing and assessing where our areas of compliance and non-compliance might be within our existing community plans, for example. So what's on the screen for illustrative purposes is within the Broadway plan. This is the South Granville station. Station's not built yet, but it's still identified as the TOA. And across the Broadway plan area, it's important to note that within the TOAs, over 82% of the Broadway plan either meets or significantly exceeds TOA legislation. So all of the beige coloring there that you see on the screen exceeds the TOA legislation, in some cases significantly exceeds the TOA legislation. Of the areas in red on this screen, for example, around the 3 FSR ring towards the bottom end of the screen there, if you look south of 12th, most of that is really where the plan allows for a 2.76 story product. So the difference between the TOA and this location of 3 and 8 stories is fairly marginal. The only other area that's of interest is in the central ring there along South Granville, where the legislation permits up to 5 and 4 FSR respectively. Those areas are allowed 3 FSR and 6. The intent was to protect that retail shopping experience and street. So notwithstanding that we have to look at opportunities for more heightened density, land economics will start to kick in around what is the highest and best use around retail continuing to be a strong use in that location. And there's certainly urban design solutions that we're looking at around how we can continue to maintain the feel and character of that street. Just wanted to switch gears to a different TOA. So this is actually Marine Landing, Marine Drive Station down in Marpole. Here, the areas of non-compliance are more significant, and this is, I think, just an era of the plan. So Canby plan was designed more of a hub and spoke approach, where there would be density around the transit station and along arterials, but much of that inner neighborhood was left to remain, and they're currently designated, for the most part, R11. So again, here, the vast majority of those lots are R11. They're now permitted up to 3 FSR and up to 8 stories. So there'll be an exercise to have to go into some of these community plans to update these, our community plans to help provide more guidance on that. You'll see in the station heads, most of those are compliant, and importantly as well, the industrial lands at the bottom of the screen and the gray are also exempt from the TOA legislation. So just for clarity, the TOA heights and densities only apply to residential lands and do not apply to lands that are for industrial use or non-residential use, where residential might only be secondary or auxiliary at most. In other parts of the city, or just before I go on, just for clarity as well, in other parts of the city, there's kind of 3 tiers where, as I mentioned, Broadway plan, much of the plan exceeds the TOA legislation. There's other spots, like I've just shown you here on Marine Drive, where the community plan might not exceed the TOA requirements. And then there's other parts of the city where there is no area plan yet, or is no governing policy. We've got Rupert Renfrew, which is underway right now, coming to council in a draft later this year and a final into 2025. And then there's other spots like Nanaimo Station, the 29th Station, that don't have area plans that give effect to this. So some of the guidance here that we're going to be looking from council later in June is how do we help guide applications where we have that first tier of plans that already exceed it? What do we do about the plans that might not quite exceed it? And then what do we do in areas that haven't even gone through any of the detailed planning exercises yet as well? As I mentioned earlier, the last bit of the legislation on Bill 47 is around parking minimums and parking bylaw changes. So the establishment of no parking minimums for the residential uses in TOAs. The city, through our engineering department, is looking at a citywide approach because they also have to do it for the small scale units as well. So exploring whether how we apply no parking minimum citywide, not just in TOAs as well. They still look to require things like, as I mentioned, accessible parking. We're exploring matters relating to visitor parking, bike parking, and other TDM measures to help support parking minimums, as well as aligning these with our TOA bylaws coming in June. And engineering is taking a careful lens around how we manage our on-street parking demand as well, because they go hand in hand. If you have a no minimum off-street, what are the implications to on-street parking as well? So they're taking a careful look at that. Next steps, as I mentioned, are threefold. One is the TOA bylaws and maps and the parking bylaw amendments, and then the additional guidance we'll be looking for from council is on the rezoning policy to accompany it. As I mentioned, there's certainly the opportunity to look at how we provide more information and more guidance to applications as they come in, both around how we manage land speculation, but also how we secure the forms and types of housing we're looking for. As you will hear through the housing needs report and Housing Vancouver strategy, 72% of our housing needs going forward, or almost 75%, are rental and below market. And one of the best places to secure those, and in some cases the only places to secure much of that, are in our TOA areas. So there will be a need to carefully look at how we encourage and support rental in the TOA areas. As I mentioned before, the legislation only restricts that use, that density and that height. But it certainly provides opportunities for council to manage and control the use, the tenure, the affordability, infrastructure and amenities required, as well as certain form of development and urban design conditions and requirements to help protect areas like Chinatown, Gastown, Yaletown, other important high streets and commercial retail streets as well. Just shifting a little bit past the legislation into some of the implementation and funding. As part of the introduction of the legislation, the province allocated $51 million to local area municipalities to support the implementation of this. Vancouver's share was about $3.3 million. We've started to look to our work and how we might allocate that towards staff resourcing and consulting costs on the technical studies, data mapping and information technology to make our information and our processes more efficient, to support it as well as the creation of the ACC and the update on the DCL framework. The province also introduced clarification as well that we can use this money on the implementation of some of the more recent legislation on Bill 16, which is also positive. As I mentioned earlier, this does require more funding and more support from levels of government. The 3.3 million is a drop in the bucket around what's actually required to support this growth in terms of the infrastructure and the housing to support the growth. And so this will require more partnership and more discussions with our federal and provincial partners to help deliver on and implement all of this through actually making sure homes get built. So just a summary of some of the next steps. We're going to continue to dialogue with the province regarding the legislation, regulations, and policy manuals to get the clarification we need to help finalize some of this matter. Our interim housing needs report is on track for fall this year. You'll see a draft and some information coming out this spring from our housing team. We're preparing those zoning changes, as I mentioned, for the small-scale housing within the restricted zones before June, as well as the TOA legislation requirements and parking bylaw updates also before the end of June. Our finance and growth update will include an extensive work around all the background technical work to support that, which will ultimately come forward to Council in 2026. And we're also, as I mentioned, advancing the implementation work around Vancouver Plan, as well as development of Vancouver's first citywide official development plan, also required by June 2026 under Bill 18. As part of our work, we did look at what are the impacts, and so on the screen I won't read through all the details, but we have taken a careful look at where some of the work that was underway had to slow down or stop or pause because the staff teams that were involved in those had to be involved on the provincial mandates. So there have been some delays on, as I mentioned, the report back on R11. Rupert Renfrew had to take a bit of a slow walk on some of its work, pushing now into 2025. Though you will have a report back on Broadway Plan this fall, some of the more technical work around the urban design guidelines for C3A have been pushed off, and some of the impactful work on zoning changes for apartments and social housing has also had to slow down a bit while we pivot towards this other provincial work. That doesn't mean it's not stopping. It's certainly going to continue, and we're certainly going to sequence that work with the other priorities in our work plan, including some of the future area planning work as well. I will say, just in terms of rezoning and development applications, we're seeing lots of interest, both in small scale and TOAs. In some cases, I think I'm up to over 20, maybe more. There's lots of applications that have already received an approval in principle within a TOA, and they've now paused their project, thinking about coming back in for more heightened density. So in the interim, there might be slowdowns on housing delivery and housing approvals, but the hope in the long term is that we get more housing out of some of this legislation and these actions as well. We have taken as well a look, and I won't read through all of this, around the impact on our housing supply and the different work and how it's helping to inform our prioritization around like high, medium, low impact and ease of implementation, whether it's the city official development plan, standardizing those apartment zone district schedules, the work related to implementing the villages as pursuant to a motion from council, and the cleanup and the finalization of the R11 report back to council as well. This includes other work that we're working on housing as well, on the Housing Vancouver targets and refresh seniors housing strategy, student housing policies and support for that, enabling social housing without rezoning. So again, this is more around pre-zoning lands to enable more social housing. Downtown East Side plan update, housing livability, apartment living, and other guidelines to help support complete neighborhoods and better livability conditions in apartments. And then lastly, as well, some other impactful work that's underway relates to Jericho lands, the development of an official development plan and phase 1 rezoning for those, as well as some local area plan initiatives that have been prioritized, including Broadway plan implementation, ongoing work with the province on UBCX extension, Rupert Renfrew, and Northeast Falls Creek implementation as well. I think this is the last slide, and thank you for bearing with me on all of this. The last bit was just an overview of the new legislation that was introduced this spring. So we haven't had a chance to get through all the weeds and all the details, and we haven't seen regulations. These have not yet been passed as royal assent, so they're still technically bills, not yet law. But Bill 4 introduced new authorities for the Chief Licensing Officer on aggressive dogs, as well as tree planting requirements for permitting. To help encourage achieving our tree canopy expectations and tree retention plans. Bill 11 was important as well, as it expanded the definition or introduced a definition for First Nations and First Nations corporations, where those social housing projects owned or operated by First Nations could be eligible for DCL and CAC waivers or exemptions. To date, the exemptions and waivers only applied to government lands or nonprofit. So we welcome the introduction of the First Nations into that category as well. Bill 16 is also extremely important as it introduces authorities for inclusionary housing bylaws and density benefit bylaws. For inclusionary housing, think this is a requirement in order to deliver that project, where a density bonus bylaw are optional density bonusing triggers where you can get more heightened density if you deliver other amenities or other benefits as well. The other piece of the legislation of Bill 16 that's very important, and this relates to our pre-zoning authorities, is the ability to secure infrastructure, road dedications, TDM measures at the development permit stage of the process. So this was a significant limiting issue of our ability to get away from rezoning, where we can secure those dedications and requirements. Now we can do so through our DP processes, enabling more opportunities for pre-zoning and securing those items at DP stage. Bill 18, as the last one, basically brings the city on par with LGA municipalities on the requirement for a citywide official development plan. It'll have the same content and kind of engagement process requirements of an OCP in the LGA municipalities. So we welcome the alignment across the board on that, and that work is well underway, launching as well this spring, and we'll be bringing that forward to council before the deadline in the legislation, which is June 2026. And the last bit is also aligning with LGA municipalities is updates to the public hearing procedures bylaw, as well as the creation or establishment of development approval bylaws. On the public hearing side, it's where a rezoning application is residential and consistent with an ODP, the public hearing is prohibited from being held. You still have to make a decision, but the public hearing is prohibited. And it also creates opportunities to waive public hearings for other types of projects as well. And I'm happy to answer questions in more details on that. That's the end of the presentation. I do apologize for going a little bit over, but lots of information. I wanted to make sure I was able to convey it properly. So welcome any questions.
Seeing no question. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, first in the queue is Councillor Kirby Young.
Mike. Thanks, Mayor. Can I move for a second round just in case we need it?
Seconded by Councillor Bly. All those in favor say yay. All those opposed say nay. Great. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thanks, and thanks for the very comprehensive presentation. It's a lot to unpack. My first question is really around the SMA, which is such an acronym, but this small-scale multi-unit housing. And Council have been getting some feedback with respects to why we held it when we first implemented our regulations prior to the provincial, the FSR at 0.6 to 0.75 and less than the 1.0 at the single family lot. And now at that time, and now obviously it not synchronizing with the provincial requirement. If memory serves, I think that was a conscious choice to, and so I'm just looking for, if you can reaffirm what those reasons were. Was it to not disincent some of the smaller scale rental buildings, or can you talk a bit about, give us some background on that one? And then also the flip side, what is the implication of moving to a line for all the RT zones? And then third part, is that part of the planned work that's coming to the report in June?
Thanks for that. And so I'll try to break it down a little bit. So in R11, the zone regulation changes basically require or allow for an individual or property owner to still build a single family home of 0.6 FSR, as well as multiplex options up to 1 FSR. So I think 4 to 6 units of 1 FSR, but only 1 unit up to 0.6 FSR. We're looking at a similar approach for the small scale of the SMA lands in RT7, RT9, and FSD, where if you wanted to still do a single or a duplex, you could at that lower density. But if you wanted to do the multiplex options, you could do that at the higher density. So we're creating that range of housing options for applicants and builders to kind of select from within the confines of the regulations as well.
Okay, can we just jump into that for a sec?
Sure.
So smaller density if you're still trying to build a single family, essentially standalone.
Correct.
Higher density in our regulations if you're going for the multiplex, multi-units, which we're all aspiring to. Difference between, can we now contrast the difference between where Vancouver is and the provincial legislation?
Certainly, and we'll be able to provide more of this information in June when this comes forward, and we're developing a bit of a handy table. But there are a couple nuanced differences around how density bonusing is going to work between the two. The other differences are around to secure the multiplex in R11, you need to have a laneway, you need to have access, where in the small scale housing requirement, there is no restriction on that. Again, just having to follow the legislation requirements. We're also looking to calibrate and fine tune how that works on that size of lot. So the size of lot threshold of 3, 4, or 6 units is different from how R11 was structured, as well as the proximity of a bus stop. So there's some nuanced differences. We'll still have a lot of the similar housing options, but how and where they apply and who gets them might be a little bit different than how R11 was set up.
Okay, so just to be clear then, our staff doing that analysis of part of the expected report back in June, is that part of
Correct.
the intended work plan? And so that
Part of it,
doesn't
yes.
require.
We'll have a slide to help show you and illustrate the differences on that.
Okay, and then just to be explicit, then that doesn't require any further direction from council in terms of aligning with the provincial requirements, or what will we get back in June? Will it be, yes, we're aligning, or will it be, we are, we're not, and here's our analysis as to yes or no?
It'll include analysis, but we must align. So as I mentioned, part of the structure of the recommendation report, we're still working on the details, but we're going to have a section of the report that says this is what you must do under the legislation, and here's the other things we think would make sense to do as well.
Okay.
So you'll have the opportunity to weigh in on both, but again, the nature of the public hearing will only be on the second half.
Okay, so no need for council to provide direction?
Not at this time.
You're doing it already. Okay. That's great. So moving on from the SMA, I love that acronym. The other thing is really around, maybe we can do on the DCLs and all the variations of acronyms, CACs, et cetera. A couple of points. Has there been any discussion with respects to the fact that DCLs are still limited to, in terms of supporting growth, to new infrastructure versus at the staff level, or is there an opportunity for council to do advocacy on changing that policy that DCLs can apply to the existing infrastructure, because new population puts pressure on that and ours is aging and it needs to serve those people?
Great question, and that was part of where some of our slides were trying to get at around partnership with the province, the feds, around how we support the cost of growth. Currently, the legislation on DCLs and ACCs it's only funding growth-related costs. So if you've got a sewer that's $10 million and half of that is growth and half of that's renewal, only the $5 million component goes into the DCL or the ACC, as the case may be, depending on the infrastructure amenity. So those are part of ongoing discussions, FCM, and some of the work we're doing in the back end with financing. I'm not sure if it's great. If we need some more detailed answers on that, but it is part of the ongoing effort.
Okay, but council could potentially take steps to put some more weight behind that. Also you made a comment on the similar vein with respects to, there was a concern that housing and childcare are not considered an amenity. So I appreciate that's because it's no longer a spending category, but arguably isn't that a positive in terms of delineating the different responsibilities of the different level of government and allowing us to spend the amenity charges that we collect on our existing community infrastructure that nobody else pays for, like parks, community centers, libraries, all those things?
Certainly, and we had that level of detail in the appendix in our staff report around how much we rely on CACs and DCLs to help deliver these things. And when you start restricting that, it creates issues with that as well. That was in the fall when we got Bill 46. Now we've got Bill 16, which the province is now introducing new tools or additional tools on inclusionary housing and density bonusing. So the notion being you can use inclusionary zoning requirements to calibrate your zoning to still get 20% below market or social housing instead of using an ACC, and use density bonusing to help you get other things as well, whether it's childcare or other amenities too. So
thanks, Templar. I'm over time.
I'll take it off the next one. Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Yeah, thank you. And just may I commend you first, Templar, for an excellent presentation. You started answering my questions as you went through, so I have less questions, but thank you for that work. And I'm going to continue in the vein started by Councillor Kirby-Young around density bonusing in particular. I mean, we've used density bonusing to get more affordability. So what is our challenge now? How do we achieve the units that come in under market that density bonusing used to deliver for us?
So great question. So I think this all starts back with housing needs, right? So our housing needs are going to direct and inform how and where and what we want to do in terms of supporting that housing. It'll inform our official development plan. It'll inform our zoning. All of that needs to be calibrated through a tool or multiple tools to help achieve that. So whether or not it's reviewing our existing zones to introduce inclusionary zoning requirements, layering those on with density bonusing obligations, picking one of those tools or both of those tools, how the ACCs layer on with that, that'll be all part of this kind of collective effort to, shake out how and which tool works best in those different geographic areas.
Can I just ask you to explain what you just said a little bit more? Sure. You said layer on density bonusing. I thought we couldn't layer on density bonusing. Can we do it only in certain areas of the city?
Good question. So the notion is you can't use the same charge for the same amenity, but you can layer on these charges to help secure and deliver the kind of amenities, infrastructure, and complete communities you want. So hypothetically, you could require within 5 FSR, 1 FSR is being below market. That's a requirement. You could then layer on density bonusing beyond it to say if you want 7 FSR, 2 more FSR, here's the density bonusing charge to help support amenities or infrastructure in that area. So one is the requirement, the other is the option, and then that project would still have potentially an obligation on DCLs and ACCs as well. So it's about making sure those projects are still viable and still work to deliver the project that we're looking for.
We're not restricted then, even though it sounds like we're restricted by the province. I mean, with the use of density bonusing, we still can layer on density bonusing for rezonings.
So for example, a rezoning isn't so much density bonusing. Density bonusing is at the zone level, right? So it's straight to development permit. But in rezoning, we can continue to exercise council's discretion on that. There are some restrictions about how we use density bonusing in a TOA that'll take effect next year, which is a bit more complicated. But in short, I think the main difference of what we can and can't do is you can't have an amenity that's in a DCL and an ACC applied to the same project. The notion being is charge them once, don't double count. And we don't do that necessarily right now either, but the legislative framework is trying to be set up so that you're not double counting amenities and you're just collecting once.
Okay, so we can still add more density in a rezoning, for example, and get units, for example, that are below market units.
We'll be able to continue to do that through rezoning as well.
Okay, that's great. So the issue that has been raised, in fact, we've got a number of letters in from the public on this, are areas that have character homes, and including First Shaughnessy. So what is we've said there's no exemption for First Shaughnessy in this. So what does that mean in terms of the development that would be now allowed that was formerly restricted in First Shaughnessy?
Yeah, a good question as well. And so the legislation, we must follow the legislation. The first step is it a restricted zone? Through our analysis, we've determined that First Shaughnessy is a restricted zone, and now the legislation must apply. There are some exemptions, so if the property is designated heritage, it's exempt, or if it's in a heritage conservation area, which doesn't apply to First Shaughnessy. So for character homes, so anything that's not designated, so pre-1940 homes that aren't designated, the way we're suggesting going forward to comply with the legislation is you'll have the option. You can retain that through through multiple conversion dwelling, and on the non-character homes, you can do a multiplex as well. So we're creating options and opportunities for applicants while still allowing for some preservation if the applicant wants to actually preserve that house as well.
Okay, and will that apply then to some of the RT zones that?
Correct.
Okay, and it will apply there. And are we at all looking into the fact that, so maybe to back up, do you think that there's going to be a loss of those character homes? And particularly, I'm concerned about the character homes that have got multi-rental units, for example, in them.
There's certainly potential for loss of character, and anything that's not designated. The legislation, again, is indiscriminate towards that. It's they're creating options for housing, and they're kind of leaving it to municipalities and applicants to develop that. So again, we can still have guidelines and encourage character retention, but we're not allowed to restrict that on that basis per se.
Okay, I'll come back on further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Templar and the team for this presentation. A lot of information here, very comprehensive report. So my question, why only RT7 and RT9, they were considered as the restricted zone, but not other RT zones?
I can tell you this was an ongoing and continues to be an ongoing great conversation internally around how the legislation is structured around a single and a duplex. Our zones are very different. They're more complicated. They have more options and uses spread within them. So effectively, on the other RT zones, there were sufficient housing options that would get the zone to be considered non-restrictive, or there were certain RT zones that were wholly contained within a TOA, which exempts them from that. And again, the province is looking to create more heights and densities in those TOAs. So after completing that analysis, the ones that were left were RT7, RT9, and FSD that were otherwise not exempt or otherwise didn't have sufficient housing options.
Okay, I see. So for the report back in June, that will be only RT7, RT9.
And FSD.
Other RT zones.
RT7, RT9, and First Shaughnessy.
Yeah, okay. another follow-up question to Councillor Kerbion's question regarding small. So other than density bonus, are there any other plan to encourage higher density in those restricted zones?
Good question. So this is just the first step of conforming to legislation. And again, we were on a very tight timeline. R11 took 18 months to deliver the output of that. We had 3 months effectively to do this from January until effectively the end of April, May, before a report has to be finished. So on those very tight timelines, this is what staff were able to deliver. Through Vancouver Plan and some of the other objectives on implementing Vancouver Plan, much of these areas will be able to have more opportunities through future council decisions to increase heights and densities. So if you want to see more than what's there, we can work those into future work plans as well. And if you want to expand to other areas, we can do that as well. But again, it comes with a bit of a trade-off of where do we want to spend our finite resources to help deliver housing options.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. So I guess council is able to give some directions in the report back in June.
Should you choose to, yes, we can look
Okay.
at expanding that as well.
Perfect. The other questions, how this Bill 44 impact cities' infrastructures in those restricted zones?
Good question. So the legislation encourages, again, delivering these housing options. We have the opportunity to request extensions, which we didn't. The short story is they encourage you to understand those infrastructure challenges and constraints. We have a fairly good handle on what those limitations are. That's why we're coming forward with the 1 FSR limit, similar to R11. If there's a desire to go beyond that, that's where we start getting to risks and infrastructure capacity concerns, which could require more renewal, more replacement. And there is no current funding for that. There's not in current work plans to do that, and we don't have funding from the province to do that either.
Okay, so I guess there will be a more comprehensive report in the June report back.
That'll speak to that too as well, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The other question is Bill 47. I think you touched a little bit in your presentation about the potential impact on Chinatown and downtown east side. So can you expand a little bit more about what is our mitigation strategy?
Sure, and so the provincial manual does provide some guidance on this as well. And while the intent of the legislation is to encourage more housing, more development in and around transit-oriented areas, it certainly isn't intended to overreach and extend into other areas of your jurisdiction, which include use, tenure, affordability, and urban design standards and conditions as well. The manual goes on to say that not every site will be able to achieve those heights and densities based on lot frontage, size, and other configuration issues. And there's even a nod in the manual as well that Chinatown and the way Vancouver regulates development in Chinatown through urban design guidelines, through zoning, still applies. So if we want to protect and manage those cultural and heritage assets, we can continue to do so, and that might result in things like not achieving heights and densities as prescribed by the regulation. So we think we have some flexibility there about how we do it. I will say that much of Chinatown enables a similar density. It's the height that's in particular a concern for Chinatown.
Yeah, so you're talking about the 90 feet limitation in Chinatown.
Yeah, correct. Like the height of it is more conducive of like a 5-6 story product as opposed to a 20-story product.
Okay, and it'll be up to council's decision to make some change if that's the direction we want to.
Correct. So you will consider applications through rezoning through that basis, or if
Okay.
you want to make other changes through your zoning on a district schedule basis as well.
Okay, so the other questions, Bill 47. So if there's a conflict between cities' existing policy, like shadowing, like the vehicles, which policy override which?
Good question, and that's where we're still looking at some of the details on that. We do think that there is some interpretation and flexibility that you can condition and help manage a development to achieve other urban design form of development conditions and requirements, just like we just talked about in Chinatown. But again, it's all around some of the site-specific nuances, and we're still looking at some of those details as well. Part of what you'll see later this summer as well is an initial report back and then an ultimate report next year on our citywide urban design guidelines, as well as council protected views. So there's still the opportunity for council to kind of set the policy direction on those items as well.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Yeah,
I might come back.
I'm giving everyone a little bit of leniency because we have a second round, so I'll take it off the second round. So, Councillor Bly.
Thanks very much, Mayor. And thanks, Templar. You say, I'm sorry I went over. I can't imagine how you would have spoken any faster through that presentation. So
I could if you want, but
no, that was just great. And appreciate that this is sort of staged updates to council to sort of bring along council with many of these changes, which we'll see more specifics around June. So appreciate the answers to the previous questions. I have a question in terms of how will the city's housing Vancouver strategy be adjusted to align with the new authorities and requirements introduced by these bills? And just noting the progress we've made so far to sort of tip the scale to be more balanced in terms of condo, rental, below market, the trend in those initial slides was looking pretty positive, I would say. So just wondering thoughts there.
Thanks, Councillor Dan Garrison, Housing Policy and Regulation. Just to jump in on this one. So we are looking at all the legislation that's coming through as we look at the Housing Vancouver strategy. We will be coming back to you with a report in late June to update our housing targets and to bring back a new 3-year action plan for Housing Vancouver implementation. When we did adopt Housing Vancouver in 2017, we adopted an action plan that's mostly been implemented now, and that's one of the reasons why you've seen the positive results over the last few years. But in June, you will see us come back with a new proposed action plan, and the main actions in that will be driven primarily by the legislative changes that we've seen from the province, the implementation of the Vancouver plan, and recent council direction we've received.
Okay, that's great. Look forward to seeing that. Thank you very much. Templar, I wonder if you could share a little bit more, maybe just in summary, because I know you've touched on it throughout the presentation and other questions, but generally speaking, what's going to be our approach to implement the Vancouver plan? And how do we plan to align it with the provincial changes?
Great question. And so Council and the public will be receiving more information this spring on Vancouver Plan implementation, including the Vancouver Plan ODP. So part of that recalibration is a phasing plan around how we want to deliver more housing options in the work, whether it's villages, Rupert Renfrew, other stationary plans, pre-zoning for social housing. All of those things are part of Vancouver Plan implementation. So you'll see more in the spring on that, and that work plan will ultimately culminate in deliverables along the way through this council term as well.
Okay, really good. You mentioned something around future decisions of council and elaborating on these legislative changes in the report coming back in June. You mentioned the word speculation. And I just wonder, what is your take on how things are now? Obviously, this is widely reported on. There's no secret that these changes are coming, regardless of a public hearing, if you need it or you don't. Are we seeing a shift already in terms of interest around perhaps what was once a development project of 6 stories in rental that complied with the existing zoning that's now being retracted and perhaps shifting over to higher density strata, which of course is going to naturally drive up and increase speculation, drive up land value, increase speculation? How do we not have a runaway train on that? These changes.
That's a part of our concern as well, and what we're looking to help manage. We're certainly seeing speculation in developers and landowners and realtors all looking to understand this better. They're looking for guidance. We're seeing applicants who are pausing projects in a development permit stage. I had one that's actually in excavation saying, instead of townhouses, can I get that instead? So there's lots of interest here, and one of the areas that we're looking to help manage this again is just going back to our housing needs. Is how do we help achieve those housing needs? We need to do that through rental and below market rental. And TOAs are a fantastic location to land that, right? So part of the ways of manage speculation is helping to control affordability and tenure of a project. So if you want to see more rental and you want to help manage speculation, those are certainly tools and ideas that we're looking at right now that can come forward as part of our June report.
Okay, great. So that was my follow-up. So this is focusing in a little bit is that there is no requirements around tenure. That's still going to be up to this council to set the tone in terms of what it is we want to see built. And if we do see projects that have greater density around strata, then we naturally will still be able to pull those levers to be able to increase affordable housing within those projects.
Yeah, and think of our current community plans, Broadway plan, heights and densities for rental and below market are in excess of what you typically get for strata. So there's still going to be opportunity to explore options for tenure, but we want to make sure that the highest and best use and the encouragement is towards that rental side to help achieve our targets as well.
Okay, great. I think that's my time, but I'll come back on. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I will also say thank you for this excellent presentation and the huge amount of work staff have been doing on this. And I also had a question like Councillor Bly on tenure and rentals, so really appreciate that answer. Are we looking to, we've had these questions about how we make each of these types of housing options easier. Are we looking to pre-zone the SRP or I don't know what the right language is, do one public hearing for all of them and not need public hearings later so that we're making those low-rise apartments faster and easier to build?
Absolutely, and I think that's part of what you might hear more back on Housing Vancouver strategies about how we action that through either pre-zoning of SRP or pre-zoning of social housing or updating our zoning bylaws for apartment zones, and to get us out of the habit of having to rezone. Again, with the legislation on Bill 16, that strengthens our ability to go and do that. It'll take some time to figure out how and where and make sure we've got the information available, but that is certainly part of the direction going forward.
And that's in the June update?
This will be more part of van plan implementation and the housing needs and housing Vancouver strategy report back. So they're all coming this spring, May, June, but lots of information coming this spring for council.
Looking forward to it. Great. Can you say a bit more about when and where public hearings are and aren't required? The province requires us to not have a public hearing on some portions, but staff are still recommending a public hearing on other portions. And I've just heard some confusion in the public about.
Yeah, good question. So Bill 18, not yet royal assent. We expect it will achieve royal assent. Basically brings us on par with what the LGA municipalities have. And so if you've got an official development plan, to which we only have area ODPs right now, they only cover about 6% of the land base currently. Think of EFL, Arbutus, Southeast Falls Creek, downtown ODP, where there's a rezoning application that is predominantly residential, 50% or more residential, there's a prohibition on holding a public hearing. You still have to make a decision in council, but the public hearing shifts. Instead of an evening public hearing, you go to a daytime decision to which you can then elect to hear speakers or not, where a public hearing you must hear speakers. So there's a nuanced change about how a decision is made. The other bit is there's the potential to waive public hearings, again, at council's discretion, for any other use, any other project that is also consistent with an ODP. So in the short term, where we have these localized ODPs, we don't expect to see a lot of prohibited or waived public hearings. But as Vancouver Plan ODP comes into effect, and again, targeting 2026, that will certainly open up more opportunities to have fewer public hearings on compliant rezoning applications.
Okay, great. I have said this before, happy to see that the SMA applies in First Shaughnessy. And I know we've had some of this conversation before, but what does it look like for us to move toward actually allowing more density in those in that neighborhood? Some of those lots are so enormous, and to think of only a 4 or 6plex being built there seems like actually quite a poor use of land to be locked into for the life of that building.
Yeah, fair question as well. And so Vancouver Plan and some of the implementation work around there are places to explore that. In Vancouver Plan 2022, it still contemplated the Heritage Conservation Area ODP. It didn't contemplate a lot of heightened density in First Shaughnessy. So if there's desires to do more in those or other areas of the city, that would be a requirement for future report back, future direction from council to explore more heights and densities across other parts of the city.
Okay, and on those large lots, am I right in understanding, because the SMA is limited to 3 stories, if we were to allow low-rise apartments, we could protect more of the tree and green space while building more housing and have it be just a little taller?
Yeah, and that would certainly need a lot more technical work by staff, and it hasn't been part of any work plan to date. So again, that would have to be some further direction.
Okay, okay. And last question around protecting high streets. I don't think I have enough time. I'll come back on and hear more on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I not only want to echo the praise that you're hearing from council here on this work, but to acknowledge just how unusual it is to have provincial legislation to come in like this and download an enormous amount of work to our staff. And you guys have rallied and come forward with an immense amount of analysis on this, which I think we're extremely grateful for. I just want to drill down on a couple of points. There is on page 9 of the report, There's a reference to staff seeking clarification around lands affected by the transit-oriented areas to ensure employment in non-residential lands can continue to support growing jobs and economy. Of course, you recall that Council proposed an amendment to just clarify the employment lands piece around TOAs that included the reference to the Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy for that 200 meter. I think the direction was pretty clear that we wanted to be able to look at a mixed use model with potentially some rental housing over and above light industrial and commercial. Does this potentially jeopardize that in any way, or in your view?
I would see them as completely separate. So the TOA legislation is about encouraging more height and density and more residential uses. It was intentionally excluding non-industrial because they didn't want to weigh into that through this legislation. So TOAs don't apply on industrial lands, and that's a separate conversation from the work to do with municipalities electing to allow residential uses within 200 meters pursuant to the RGS. And so we're looking at that. That's part of our employment lands work that's ongoing. You will be getting a report back on that. And one of the initiatives would be a South Vancouver lands industrial study to help explore that and consider those options there.
Yeah.
So that'll be a separate piece of work.
Okay, and that includes the Main Street Station, Great Northern Way, all those places where we're seeing those.
I think all those can be part of the broader consideration of what we do in these areas, but again, a separate piece for the South industrial lands in particular as well.
Okay, thanks. I look forward to that. I know that there is a stipulation that height and density cannot be used as a rationale for restrictions, but generally speaking, when the public comes to us, they usually talk about buildings being too tall and there are concerns about there being too many people coming in. So the question I have is, how do we follow up in communicating that particular detail to the public as part of our overall communications plan with regards to these changes?
A good question. We have a website that's up where we'll have more information and content as the TOA policy gets developed. Ultimately, we'll need to factor some of this into our rezoning referral reports for you as well to help ensure that the public is aware of here's the things you can weigh in on or you can condition and restrict versus others. But we certainly see that in other locations too. And again, just stepping back to our community plans, newer community plans enable more height and density than most of this anyways. And so this council has been pretty progressive, and past councils have been progressive around enabling more heights and densities. So those will be further conversations and discussions with council, and then ultimately through application stages with the public as well.
I just think it just bears explaining again, but off-street minimums are a direction that this council has already been headed down that pathway. Clearly, this is being emphasized through these new provincial legislation. What are the things that we are doing currently and can do more of to make sure that we are encouraging that mode shift and trying to have less reliance on single occupancy vehicles?
Yeah, I'll talk just until Paul gets up here as a segue, but so part of that is through our community planning exercises in complete neighborhoods and encouraging that mix of uses. But on the parking and the TDM measures, maybe you want to jump in on other parts of that too?
Great, thank you for the question. Paul Storer, Director of Transportation. Yeah, along with looking at eliminating minimums, we're also exploring the potential for maximums. We are revisiting our transportation demand management program to make it easier for developers, but also more comprehensive around the city, and then just continuing to invest in sustainable transportation around the city. Walking, biking, and transit is really key to this working well. And of course, the land use complete neighborhoods is really, really key for people to be able to, meet their daily needs near where they live.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm coming up to my time there. I just, first of all, appreciate the answer and look forward to seeing this evolve.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dominato.
Thank you, Mayor. And Templar, echoing the thanks and gratitude for you and the team, because it's quite complex and you guys have moved very quickly. I do have a couple of clarifying questions. I want to circle back to, you had the slide around the DCL, CAC, density bonusing, ACC's comparison. And I just wanted to get clear that effectively under the provincial legislation, DCLs, there's expanded uses potentially in terms of those funds being applied. But do the ACCs effectively replace the CACs while we can still use them for the time being, but that replaces, ACCs replace CACs at the local level?
I think these are all policy conversations to have with council as part of our financing growth tools and mechanisms. There certainly can continue to be a role for CACs on complex sites and major projects that are more difficult to land an ACC, and what are the amenities associated with them. But again, that's part of where we'll be working through this over time. I will say that once an ACC bylaw is adopted by council, which might be still 2 years out, there's in-stream protection against that. So anything in-stream as of that date is also exempt. So you might not actually collect any ACCs on projects for some time until we kind of get through that in-stream pipeline. So again, there'll still be a role, I think, for the short term and midterm on CACs, and how we update and evolve those tools over time will be up to council.
Okay, thank you. That leads into another question I have around infrastructure needs, and particularly there's sort of two questions here. In that, are we taking steps to quantify our infrastructure needs in light of the provincial legislation, federal legislation, and expectations, and finding a way to sort of share that back? Because my instinct is that potentially there's some potential downloading coming through some of these changes around ACCs, and that and again, I know it's all still being fleshed out, but I think there's a risk here that we're adding the density which we need, we're adding the housing, and we already know even prior to this legislation we had gaps. So I'm just curious what that looks like going forward in terms of quantifying our needs and then sharing that back to policymakers at the provincial and federal levels.
We're very much aware and attuned to that as well. And so that's part of our effort to kind of understand how and where we want to grow, what are the community benefit strategy implications of that, what are the infrastructure needs associated with that, how does that factor into our ACCs and all these other tools, what gets left over that has to be picked up by the tax base, how does that fit into the capital plan? Big conversations, lots of work, but it's part of the effort that we need to have and lobby with the province and feds around how we support this, because municipalities can't do it on its own.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know there's lots of advocacy work happening at UBCM and FCM. I'm curious if you could we touch on the RT zones? I had been asking some questions offline related to RT10. So noting under the provincial legislation, it's, your slide up here, non-restricted RT10 and RT11 are included in there. My understanding, enable sufficient housing options to meet the provincial legislation, but under our own missing middle framework, RT10 is not currently included at this time. And can you just expand on that and the rationale for why and what's needed to sort of advance that further?
Sure. And so in past councils, the direction was initially to focus on missing middle on the RS zones, then consolidation of RS. So we went from 9 RS zones down to 1 R11 zone, which is where we can do missing middle. RT was not part of that. RT is different in terms of its regulations and its housing mix options. It was always kind of thought of as we can get to that next. Legislation comes in, work plans shift and change. So RT10 is not part of R11, and it's not currently part of the SMA legislation conformity exercise. But if council wants to explore those zones or other zones, we can certainly do that. Again, it's going to be a bit of a balancing effort around staff resources and what would you like us to prioritize first.
So that'd be something that at a later date we could give that direction, is to explore that. It sounds like right now we need to prioritize this, and so that's great. And then last question, if I have time. Oh, I don't. I'm running out of time. I'll wait till the second round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fry.
Thanks. And actually just following up on some of the RT stuff, because we have been getting a lot of concerns. And in fact, I live in an RT3 and there's a local construction site going on, and they're frustrated because the FSR is constrained and they have a basement that they're having to fill in with sand. And they're like, but this new legislation's happening. So can we just and they're expecting a little bit more density and I appreciate that the provincial legislation restricts this to, I think, areas that have 3, like a triplex already designated, or 3 units on a site are exempt from this legislation. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, the legislation has a definition of restricted zone, and that's effectively singles with additional dwelling units, duplexes with up to 2 additional dwelling units. So think 2 principals, 2 secondaries, and where the zone as a zone, not necessarily the individual lot, but where the zone enables more than that, multiple conversion dwellings, multiple dwellings, triplexes and the like, that would then take it out of the restricted zone and not required to conform. It certainly doesn't preclude you from directing staff to go do more later, but it's not part of the conformity requirement.
Yeah, and I just I appreciate you saying that so that it can be heard by people who are bringing these comments to us. And do you anticipate any kind of smaller tweaks to things like RT3 to kind of meet the general intention of this legislation later, understanding it's not required by this to
Well, in short, effectively, you're a bit more flexible. You don't have to follow SMA or this legislation. You can do what you want in those zones. So if they're in locations that support transit or more heights and densities through Vancouver plan, focus on those. Maybe at the same time, you can still contemplate multiplex housing options. But I think it's part of a broader what are the uses and the opportunities that you want to see there over the long term, and what work plan does that fit into?
Okay, so. But we could expect some modifications to the exempt RTs in the next work cycle kind of thing after this.
If council were to direct us to do so, as mentioned, it's not currently on a work plan item.
Okay. A number of these updates keep reflecting that there's more work coming from the province, but of course you're bound to approve a lot of this by the end of June. What does the realistic timing look like as far as when we're getting the details from the province?
So of what's missing still, the housing needs report methodology and some of the regs around that, we're expecting those again this spring. I think the provincial staff working on those kind of put that on pause while they focused on this next batch of legislation. So we're expecting that to still come forward this spring. On the amenity cost charge regulations and policy manuals, they've said regulations associated with that should be coming this spring as well as manuals later this summer or early fall. So again, we're expecting to see more of that. It's hard to kind of finish and move some of the work too far along without that. And then out of the new legislation that hasn't yet been royal assent, there will be some regs and some policy guidelines that we're expecting out of that. But again, the timing for that is still not quite clear, not quite certain. So we'll continue to work with the province. We need to get that information. We think we have enough to do what we need to by June this year. And the other stuff we should get in time to ensure we can meet our December timelines for the housing needs report as well.
Okay, and appreciate that you guys are doing a lot of heavy lifting and rapid response to this emerging file. TOAs and heritage zones. The Racial Ethno-Cultural Committee just passed some recommendations around their concerns with, for instance, Chinatown and other areas that might be impacted by TOA. How are they going to be protected through this work?
As I mentioned through a past question as well, the restriction is only on prohibiting or restricting the height and density as prescribed by the regulation, but it doesn't affect your ability to continue to regulate use, to regulate affordability, tenure, or other requirements. We don't expect to see a 20-story tower on a 25-foot lot. There's other typical urban design conditions that you can impose as well. And again, the manual does include specific language around Chinatown and the ability to protect and retain those characters, and those could still be reasons to restrict the development below those thresholds to help maintain that character.
Okay, and last question for me. The ACCs don't really come into effect until 2026, correct?
The legislation is in effect, and it's an enabling legislation, so if you wanted to pass one sooner or later, that's really up to council. We're just suggesting that the work plan to do so is a 2026 horizon, so we can align it and calibrate it with all the other financing growth tool updates that have to happen, which is all kind of coming to fruition in 2026.
Given the runway for a lot of these projects, how's that going to work in practicality sense? Like, given an option of an ACC or a CAC?
So practically, again, on an application for rezoning that applies today, it'll be typically a CAC negotiation or target CAC. The ACCs won't take effect until a bylaw is adopted, and even then, there's an in-stream protection. So again, we have to make sure we calibrate the timing and the transition of some of these tools, and that'll be all part of these future report backs about how and where we use these policy tools.
Appreciate all the work going on.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
And the extra time and diligence.
Thank you. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I'm wondering if you can speak a bit more to the work to protect the small local businesses along our commercial high streets and how that, what we can do in relation to how the provincial changes.
Yeah, fair question too. And so many of these are in community plan areas, whether it's South Granville or Main Street or Commercial Drive and other locations. Those plans did contemplate change. Like, for example, you're allowed up to 3 FSR and 6 stories in some of those locations regardless. There's a bit of land economics that'll go into that about highest and best use and consolidation of lots. So those are things that are live and aware that change will happen, but it hopefully happens at a pace that the community and the economy and the businesses can absorb. And that's part of the work we're also looking at with some of our partners in ACCS and PDS around commercial protections and commercial supports as well.
Okay, and the work that Grace and the team are doing on highest or split assessment is aligned with this in terms of helping make sure that these upzones don't result in a massive increase in rent for these small businesses?
I'll have to defer to Grace on the details of that one, but yeah.
Grace Chang, Director of Long-Term Financial Strategy. Yes, this year is actually the second year that we have the Development Potential Relief Program, and we will continue to refine it going into the future in anticipation of potential assessment changes and fluctuation as a result of the TOAs. And just so you know, City of Victoria is also reaching out to us, some other cities as well. So we are trying to kind of share the learnings because TOA is applicable across the, I would say, the province. So hopefully we can share the learnings as well with other cities.
Great. Appreciate the good work you've done and that those conversations are connected to each other. And then on sort of the flip side of that, I'm curious what we're looking at in terms of encouraging and increasing ground floor retail in areas where we're adding more housing and there isn't currently much ground floor retail.
Yeah, great question. And those are some of the kind of policy directions that council can consider on applications. And so I think of Broadway plan, there is an intention and requirement to replace commercial and encourage commercial on both first and perhaps second floor in locations too. So there's certainly through our community plan policies, the direction to do that. And this is where in some of these locations where we don't have that kind of community plan to help guide that, this is where the rezoning policy to accompany the TOA bylaws will be helpful to provide guidance where there is a vacuum of that policy to help guide that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks. RT seems to be the discussion of the day, which is interesting. But I just want to get a little bit of clarity because I'm hearing different things. And I just want to distill it down to simple terms. And what I'm hearing is the maximum that Vancouver allows in our current, the non-R79, but the inclusive zones, a 1 for multiplex, and is it 1.5 for the province?
Yeah, good question. And so we can provide more information as part of our June report back. But under R11 and where we're currently thinking about going for RT7 and RT9 is to limit the multiplex up to 1 FSR. There's no requirement, there's no regulation, there's no condition in the provincial information to impose a 1.5. They've given guidelines and suggestions to think about, 50% coverage. They've suggested densities higher than 1, for example, in some locations. The notion being is that they're trying to encourage more forms of housing, all financially tested and feasible. And through our design testing and our economic testing, we continue to show that 1 FSR still works. It helps manage our exposure on servicing and infrastructure requirements. And again, through R11, we've seen 120 plus applications, 500 units still looking to do that. So we're quite pleased with where things are going on R11. We'd like to see how things work on this going forward. And if we need to make some recalibrations and revisions over time, we can certainly come back with that too.
Okay, and then you touched on the infrastructure piece, and I remember that being a big part of the conversation too, because the question arguably is like, well, we're quite pleased now, but could we be spectacularly happy if we shifted from 1 to and bumped it up, for example? But how real of a factor was the infrastructure piece with respects to servicing sewer, power?
And I can certainly turn to Donnie Wong here, and it varies across the city, but maybe if you want to provide a bit of guidance on this.
Thanks for the question. Donnie Wong from engineering. So the teams have assessed 1.0 FSR as part of the multiplex. We haven't yet had a chance to do any further analysis or anything greater. So, but as far as the June report, we're more than happy to take that away if council would be interested for us to do that analysis.
Okay, I guess
it also-
maybe I can frame the question a different way just for time, is why did we limit it to 1 in the first place and not go higher? Like, was it an infrastructure concern or impediment?
Well, I think it was a balanced decision based on one, infrastructure risk and potential implications because of the broad application of that policy, but also we did quite a bit of financial testing for the building forms and what have you, and felt that that was the right case to move forward with.
Okay.
For analysis perspective.
Thank you. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Mayor. I did want to follow up on the legislation. I know we'll also be getting a report later around the housing targets. Are there expectations of reporting on affordability of units as part of this suite of changes to add housing? And again, recognizing it's not just Vancouver, but I'm curious if that is part of an expectation provincially that we'll be reporting back on what we're seeing in terms of price point, whether it be strata or rental.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dan Garrison, Housing Policy and Regulation. We are, through the Housing Supply Act and the Provincial Housing Target Order that Vancouver has been given, required to report back on a number of metrics. The high-level metric, which is a requirement, is the housing target order for the total number of units. However, we do have provincial guidance from the province as well around a breakdown of the proportion of that housing that should be rental, that proportion of that housing that should be below market, targeted to households with incomes below the provincial housing target, housing income limits. So there is a requirement to report back through the Housing Supply Act on that. I would say through the housing needs reports requirements, we're still working with the province and expecting guidance, but still working with them on what the ultimate requirements will be. Obviously, our housing needs reporting goes into some detail on the depth and levels of affordability that are needed to address our housing needs, and we will be expecting to report back to council on that through this.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I don't have further questions, but do have an amendment to the receive for recommendation. So if there aren't other questions, I'm happy to move that with the language that I circulated.
Okay. Oh, hold on. There's a little bit of a technicality here. Clerk, do we? We can do both at the same time. Okay, so I guess what we have to do is we have to move on. Sorry, now I don't understand. Exactly how you described it. Okay, so what we have to do, sorry, bear with me for a sec. If we can, what we're going to do is we're going to move the motion and the amendment at the same time. So I think Councillor Bly, you moved, seconded by Councillor.
I moved.
Oh, sorry. Councillor
Bly
Boyle moved it, second by Councillor Bly. Thank you very much. All right, it's clear as mud. Okay, great. Is there any discussion?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, move to the main queue. There we go. There's no one in the main queue, so no discussion. Oh, Councillor Boyle. There we go.
Thanks for figuring that out. Just again, want to say a huge thank you to staff. This is a really significant piece of work from the province, a really significant piece of work on our fronts. I know our planning team and staff had a lot of work already on your plates before this all came down, and so really appreciate the way that things have been shuffled and the really thoughtful way that these provincial changes have been brought to us and that we're moving it forward. I'm quite happy to see it happen. I'm quite happy to support it moving forward, and also have just added some language for council to signal its support for these provincial changes. The recommendation we had was simply to receive the report for information. I think it's helpful for us to be signaling our support and also directing staff to report back on possible updates to the multiplex zoning that align with the provincial site standards for small scale and multi-unit housing. I know the province has been reaching out to local governments to communicate that hope that that site standards document would be used as a guide. I know we've heard from our staff too that in terms of the many pieces of work on your plates, there are other places around the villages and elsewhere where we can see a delivery of more homes more quickly. And so the language of the amendment is just to prioritize those pieces of work to maximize housing delivery, but also to have council signal our direction that aligning multiplex with the province's SMU guidelines is where we'd like to go.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bly.
Thanks very much. And I'll just be very brief. I think that you're probably going to hear a lot of thanks and gratitude to the staff from council because there obviously is a tremendous amount of work and overlaying of existing policies and reconciling new. But I think at the end of the day, Vancouver has been on this path already for some time. And hopefully that's a net positive and that we're already sort of on our way. And I know a lot of municipalities in our region and across our province are nowhere near as far down this path as we are. So when we look at, conversations happening with the federal government and the provincial government, I keep looking at it and thinking, yeah, okay, that's what we're already doing here in the city of Vancouver to a degree. Certainly the intention behind our missing middle housing, the nodes and the thinking around and the intention around the Vancouver plan. So I think adding housing density to our city is something that we have demonstrated there's not only an appetite for, but that we recognize the need and the crisis that we are in. I don't love to use that word, but I know a lot of people experience it that way. So we need to recognize that that truly is what we're having to solve for. So happy to receive for information. I very much look forward to the June update because I think that's really where some of the material updates are going to be. And I think generally speaking, it's good to see the province weighing into this. I know a lot of people feel differently about that, but I think our region needs a bit of a level set. I think our province needs a level set in terms of sharing the burden and responsibility of housing demand and a growing population. So ultimately, I believe that's what's underpinning this, and then all the different opportunities we have in terms of increasing amenities, growth pace for growth, increasing housing supply, but also keeping our mind on tenure. And I'd say one thing that I am going to continue to keep a very close eye on is that we are cautious around not unraveling our progress in terms of building and increasing rental supply below market housing. Because in the city of Vancouver, we know that below market housing is market housing elsewhere. And so we have to recognize that we are an incredibly expensive city, and I don't want to see the scale tip to 20 stories of strata personally. I don't think that's healthy for what the need is in our city at this particular time. I know some of it helps because we need the different amenities contributions. And then hopefully with what's coming with the ACCs, that we can be opening up some of how we pay for those amenities that communities depend on in order to have a holistic suite of services that add to that quality of life. So ultimately, I think this has just been a tremendous amount of effort, but I just can't say enough about how well the staff have laid it out for us. And we're hearing some criticism in the public, and this is iterative. So let's fold all that into what we see come forward in June and start to make more of those real specific Vancouver-based tweaks in compliance with the legislation, but also responding to the unique nature of the city that we have. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bly. Okay, seeing no one else in the queue, I'm going to call the vote. Clerk, can you please take us to the voting screen? And council, please register your vote on the voting panel. All right, and the motion with the amendment passes unanimously. So thank you very much, and I will echo the comments of pretty much everyone here. Thank you for the incredible amount of work that you put into this. The sweat, blood, and tears. It was a pretty heavy lift. So thank you. Okay. The next item on the docket is report number 4, noise control bylaw review, phase 1. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on this item? All right, seeing none, this item has a presentation. We have team members here to present on this item. Not waiting for me, are we? Nope. Okay. Okay. Just making sure.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having us today. My name is Sarah Hicks. I'm the Chief License Inspector, and I'm here to provide a quick overview of the report that's before you today on the noise bylaw review.
I have not yet.
There we go. The current noise bylaw was established in 1989, and through time it's been amended, adding additional provisions and regulations for such things as commercial premise and establishing event.
I just got to interrupt you for one sec. I just got to do one thing here. Does anybody wish to declare a conflict on this item? Oh, great. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Again, it was established in 1989 and subsequently amended throughout time, adding different provisions for our different zones, such as event zones and intermediate zones, and the types of noise and regulations for those areas. As a result, over time, the bylaw became difficult to navigate, interpret, and apply. So staff conducted a review with the following objections: to modernize and update the bylaw, to make it more consistent with current practices, to reformat the bylaw to make it easier to navigate and reference, to enhance the clarity and alignment with other city bylaws, and to review internal processes and identify areas for improvement. Next slide, please. So staff reviewed the bylaw from an operational perspective to identify gaps and inconsistencies, as well as opportunities to improve the bylaw. As many pieces were added to the bylaw throughout the years, it became difficult to navigate due to inconsistent language and structure. Staff also conducted jurisdictional reviews, including multiple Lower Mainland municipalities, as well as municipalities such as Toronto, Victoria, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, San Francisco, and Seattle, to inform the review to explore options for best practices to regulate our urban noise. The review also looked at the complaints data to identify main areas of concern to inform the review, focusing on our internal processes for response and enforcement. Staff will continue to work on finding options for enhancement. In May 2023, we also launched a public survey to gather feedback and views from the noise-related issues in the city. The survey received a significant interest with almost 4,000 responses over 2 weeks. The results of the survey highlight concerns about traffic and vehicle noise, landscape and building maintenance equipment, and the construction-related noise. Public provided feedback on a number of opportunities for staff to consider through future work. Next slide, please. The proposed bylaw before you today includes amendments to improve our structure and format of the bylaw by grouping relevant regulations together to enhance the flow and ease of navigation. The proposed amended bylaw also modernizes by adding such items as the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation to the list of recognized holidays, by removing outdated provisions such as the regulation of noise from vehicle-mounted carpet equipment and outdated deco requirements for leaf blowers. The review also identified opportunities to better align our noise control bylaw with other city bylaws, including updating definitions and transferring animal-related noise to the animal control bylaw, and aligning the noise control bylaw with our solid waste bylaw. Slide, please. So in terms of next steps, the review informed our future, and staff will continue to work with the internal and external stakeholders to identify opportunities to reduce barriers and enable and foster a vibrant arts and culture environment in Vancouver. Staff will also review current regulations for commercial premise with the objective to reduce regulatory pressures while mitigating the impacts of their operations on the community. While the increased mixed-use development across the city, staff will continue to work towards a balanced regulatory framework for Vancouver's soundscape. Staff will retain the expertise of an acoustical engineer to help inform areas of work. Thank you. That is our presentation for today.
Thank you very much. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. The noise complaint that I hear the most often is around vehicles, souped up cars or motorcycles. And I didn't see, the report mentions that it's regulated by the Motor Vehicle Noise and Emissions Bylaw. Is there work being done on strengthening that bylaw, strengthening enforcement of it? Is that on staff's work plan as part of this effort? Oh, clerks,
As part of this process, no. Those bylaws are not being looked at this time. Vehicle noise is also regulated through the Motor Vehicle Act at a provincial level. So VPD works in conjunction with those two bylaws in order to conduct their enforcement.
What options do exist for us? I know the city of Edmonton recently increased fines, or a year ago increased fines for excessive motor vehicle noise.
Yeah, staff in our engineering department oversee that bylaw, so it would be something that they would have to consider where those opportunities align and future opportunities.
Okay, and that would need to be direction to staff. It's not on a current work plan.
Correct.
Okay, I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So, when I look at the survey results, I think 2/3 of people they are seeing that they were not comfortable with the landscaping equipment. So I think there was some discussion socialized with city councilors through emails. Can you elaborate more? What is the plan of City of Vancouver's collaboration with other municipality or other government entity to, to do something for the landscaping equipment?
The planning department is going to be working with Metro Vancouver related to emissions. Metro Vancouver is going to be setting out this year, we understand, to begin work on a standard emissions process, which could then involve opportunities to move from gas-related small engine equipment to electric.
Okay.
That work has not begun, to our knowledge.
Yeah, so I think it's Metro Vancouver in a better position to put that regulation in place instead of City of Vancouver.
They can set the standard across a broad number of municipalities as opposed to setting one specific to Vancouver.
Yeah.
Further, that through the work that the Park Board has done, trying to transform from gas-related equipment to electric equipment, they have found the infrastructure and related to charging, the power related to the machines, the length of time that they're able to use those, and other safety-related concerns are not yet there in the electric market. It is improving, but it is not yet there for for the city to transform to electric, particularly related to commercial markets.
Okay, thanks, sir. So last question. So the ban in West End is still in place, right?
It is, yes.
Okay, perfect. That's all my question. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carr.
Yeah, thank you. I also had questions on both landscaping equipment and souped-up vehicles. And on the souped-up vehicles, I've had a number of people email me to say, particularly late night, downtown Vancouver, Pacific Avenue in particular, there are a lot of drivers that get out there with their honking big engines, and it's really a problem. So what's the resolution for residents right now? I mean, how fast I think it's not a priority for police, so what do they do about that?
Yeah, complaints would be dealt with in the moment by VPD. You are correct, and those would be prioritized based off what's occurring for them at the time. Complaints can certainly be made to the city. The engineering department would receive those and determine how to address those moving forward.
Yeah, we don't have any way of, we can catch speeders, but we can't catch noisy motorcycles and cars, right? There's no equipment that can capture that.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I do have one other issue that has been raised to me as a councillor from the public, and that is around and related to what you talked about in terms of fostering vibrant arts and culture environment. And it has come from First Nations who have had complaints in their places of residence in teaching their children drumming, for example. Drumming can be loud, and anyway, so I'm wondering if we have thought through any exceptions for cultural practices.
That'll be a piece of work that we do moving forward when we're working through arts and culture, commercial premise, music related pieces of work. At this time, I would say that based off the conversations with enforcement staff, that is not a particular item that we have enforced on.
Okay, and so as you work through those new regulations, those cultural practices, and as I say in specific, I've been alerted to the First Nations practices, those will be considered in the new regs.
Yep, and we will work to incorporate items related to UNDRIP as well in future work.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to sort of follow the same thread that Councillors Boyle and Carr have with regard to modified exhaust systems. And there are other causes of noise that stem from vehicles, namely subwoofers that often very loud. I realize they're incredibly hard to try and track down. And I am just a quick anecdote. I actually got stuck in a hotel room near to a strip where cars like to kind of drive up and down in Penticton about a year or so ago. And I was absolutely dumbstruck by how loud those vehicle things. So first time I was able to be so close to it, and I realized just how incredibly stressful it is. And I know that we have very limited tools other than the law enforcement side of things. Do we know if the VPD have sort of active monitoring systems that they would use to be able to enforce these bylaws around the vehicle decibel levels and so on?
The decibel, we would have to get back to you on that specific question.
Oh, okay. We really don't have any effective tools. There are ways that we can sort of broadly more communicate this. For example, just a communication campaign that says that level of noise is not welcome in our city for those who are paying attention to such things.
It's certainly something that I think the engineering department could consider in terms of their ongoing public education.
Mm-hmm. And do we have any sort of science around the stress levels and other kind of health concerns that arise from these kinds of loud decibel experiences?
Today, no, but as we continue work through, our next phase of work, we will be conducting a consultation with Vancouver Coastal Health in hopes of better understanding what those opportunities and implications will be.
Okay, I was going to ask whether we were talking to the health authority about that as well. Just switching gears slightly to another source of noise, and it's been come up and it's been very controversial, and I want to be very clear that public safety and first responders are incredibly important, but there are cases in sort of denser communities where if you're near a fire station, I know that they often will go maybe a couple of blocks away before they turn on their sirens. But have there been any discussions around how to address that, particularly in neighborhoods where they might be really close? And I'm thinking Yaletown and other areas of the city where the sirens themselves can be quite impactful.
Yeah, understood. We've handed the feedback over to the relevant departments that received feedback through that public survey, and siren noise was certainly one of them. We're not aware of ongoing conversations within the department to consider changes to their operations.
Okay. And they would be able to tell us why they would need to keep these things on. Obviously, they want to make themselves very clear that they need to get to their destination. Okay. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Great. Before we move on, do we want a motion to extend? Okay. So Councillor Carr and then seconded by Councillor Dominato. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Great. We will extend. The next Councillor on the docket, Councillor Fry.
Yeah. Thanks, Mayor. And thank you for this work. On the subject of amplification, for those of us on council in the last term, we had the real issue with the aggressive street preacher that was amplified music, and we ran into some challenges around freedom of speech and blah, blah, blah. I see amplified devices are reflected in emanating from one's premises. Does this address the kind of amplification devices in the public realm?
The noise bylaw does address noise, throughout the cityscape, both on public and private. But in that particular example, when addressing items such as free speech, it can be difficult to address. But there are mechanisms for place like parks to be able to get permits to be able to entertain as buskers, and then on private property to be able to host events within those noise decibel limits as per the zone that you're in.
So the parks control bylaw also kind of impacts some of these kind of considerations when it comes to.
They do have their own bylaw that has noise components within it.
Okay, so so we also had a lot of comments about a busker who was doing bagpipes.
Bagpipes, okay.
Yeah, and so in that scenario, they would need to actually go through the park board to get a busker permit. Is that the idea?
Generally, yes, depending on where they are positioned, they do have the opportunity to seek a permit to conduct their activity.
And so the consideration would be around the decibels involved with the busker. So the difference between somebody singing with an acoustic guitar versus somebody.
Yeah, it would need to align with the Parks Board process in terms of what they're permitting at the particular time.
So, and then the last question from me on this, and it seems to me that a lot of the ideas around noise control is the loudness and the decibel level.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have considerations around like higher pitched noises and stuff that doesn't necessarily have a high decibel level, but can still be an irritant in a different way?
You know, the bylaw doesn't overly differentiate within that today. It does have dBA and dBc levels, which speak to the different kinds of decibel limits, but any types of differentiation between bass and high frequency noise would need to be future work that we would look at.
Okay, appreciate that. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of follow-up questions around, particularly around modified exhausts. And just again, you've reflected that it really falls under the Motor Vehicle Act. There are decibel limits. And so if there was an instance because I get a number of these calls too. So if someone observed or heard a vehicle, they could call, and there are fines, just correct me if I'm wrong, but VPD could issue a ticket for exceeding certain noise levels.
They could, yes.
Okay. I'm curious if, well, we have the ability currently to enforce. Is there a need for some further advocacy at the provincial level to deal with the actual modification of those vehicles because they're being made somehow, whether it's through a garage or being sold, those products to modify? Is there a need to look at that and have the province look at further restrictions as opposed to sort of completely taking it on at the civic level? I'm just curious what that would look like from your perspective and whether we should give some direction around that to advocate to the province.
Yeah, I think prior to recommending advocacy, I think conversation between engineering and VPD would probably need to be had to determine where they need additional advocacy for that topic.
Can you just reflect that back, that we, engineering and the VPD, need to have further discussions around enforcement of the existing?
Correct, enforcement and the opportunities, the tools that they have about whether those are effective, because it is not contained within the noise bylaw. I can't speak if that is something that they would appreciate receiving.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there.
Great. I'm assuming the chair. Thanks, Councillor Dominato. Okay. Councillor Boyle.
If you could see the list.
Okay, actually, yeah, we do have registered speakers. So we're now going to hear from registered speakers for this report. Public speakers should state whether they are in support or in opposition to the recommendations and may only speak once. I will also ask speakers if they are residents of Vancouver, if it is not noted on the speakers list. And our first public speaker is Tamara Heitner. We have Tamara Heitner on the phone. Great.
Yes, I am here.
Hi, Tamara.
Hi. I am a resident of Vancouver. Sorry, what else did you want to ask?
Whether you're in support or opposition.
Well, so I actually had listed as other because the first point that I had is that I have been trying to find out about this for a very long time and could not find out about who to speak to about this review that was going on. This report came out, I think it's in excess of 25 pages long. It doesn't show a comparison to the existing bylaw. It just shows a multitude of changes, which are incredibly, incredibly hard to review and reconcile if you don't have someone going through it with you to explain what those changes are. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up, aside from the fact, I'll be honest, I think I'm told I'm the only speaker registered. I'm actually very surprised. I would think the noise control bylaw is something that people care about. Today also is a Jewish holiday, and there may be people who might have wanted to sign up to speak, but who could not as a result. I really just wanted to make the point because noise, I wanted to make the point that with all of the housing density that is building up, how important having a well-defined noise control bylaw is, as more and more people are living in areas that are extremely dense, and that's just going to only increase. Noise is something that really impacts people's physical health and mental health, and the ability to be able to rest in one's home and get restorative sleep are extremely important aspects of that. I think that health concerns was brought up by Councillor Klassen, and I think that that's very, very, very important to think about in all this. So I didn't want to touch on too many things, but I wanted to talk about some things that really, I really hope that there will be, as further changes to this bylaw come up, that there will be more engaged and serious public consultation. It's because it's not just things like the traffic, which the cars, which is the case, but the way that our garbage pickup is done, which creates more trucks because of, differences between private residences and condos and things of that nature, and businesses. There's issues surrounding noise coming from private residences, which doesn't fall or isn't addressed by the bylaw. There's issues of enforcement, because whether or not it's the VPD's priority, and that surrounds things like restaurants that are, places that are zoned as restaurants but act like bars. So I really think that there's a balance. You guys talked about, arts and culture, but there is a balance, and I think there needs to be a recognition that as this city becomes more and more dense, a lot of the people who live in multi-unit dwellings are those who are not higher income don't necessarily have the choice to go live somewhere that's quieter. And I just want there to be a recognition of that as things go forward, to make sure that people can live,
Tamara, that's your,
be able to function.
That's your time. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks. Okay, that is the end of our speakers list. So thank you, Tamara, for speaking to council. Would somebody like to move the motion and second? Oh, sorry, I see we've
lost quorum.
Oh, we've lost quorum. All right. 1 minute reset. We can't move anything. Okay, we have quorum again. Okay, so now we have quorum. Would somebody like to move the motion and second? Moved by Councillor Carr, seconded by Councillor Kirby Young. Council members, any discussion? Seeing Councillor Boyle on the queue.
Thanks. Happy to support this work. Complaints and concerns about noise all the time, and so doing our best to balance those with living in a city is important, and staff continue to do a good job on that front, and I appreciate it. And I want to move an amendment specifically related to vehicle noise.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Carr. Move us over to an amendment queue and just pull that amendment up on the screen, please. Great, thank you. Okay, so that's seconded by Councillor Carr. Councillor Boyle, to your amendment.
Thanks. I'll be brief, but just to say the amendment is to direct staff to explore and bring back, sorry, the with is superfluous there, bring back with options, bring back options for strengthening and enforcing the motor vehicle noise and emissions bylaw to reduce excessive and unnecessary noise from vehicles and motorcycles. Edmonton advanced some work on this a year ago, and I have we all hear from residents, particularly as councillors have mentioned, about souped up vehicles that have been specifically adapted to make loud noise. And that's the focus here. In Edmonton, I think was really important that it was noted that, people with older vehicles that are clunky or noisy and more costly to repair, that's not the focus here. The focus is really intentionally aggressive and disruptive noise from vehicles that are adapted to make that noise. And that is what we hear concerns about, not just in the West End and downtown, but increasingly from neighborhoods across the city. I know in Edmonton, they're looking at what options exist around some automated enforcement, obviously, and figuring out how such a bylaw is part of what would need to be explored. And in Edmonton, they quadrupled the fine. Their fine was previously $250, and they increased it to $1,000 for the first offense and double that for subsequent offenses. That too is a deterrent in terms of how we enforce this. So I know more work would need to be done between bylaw staff, engineering staff, VPD, and the amendment is simply to direct that work begin.
Great, thank you. Councillor Kirby-Young to the amendment.
Thanks, Chair. I absolutely agree that we have an increasingly densifying city and noise is becoming a real issue. I have a bunch of voice memos on my phone recording, landscaping equipment, for example, outside the window. It's really disruptive when you're trying to work at home, and it's just mentally distracting. My challenge with this amendment and the way that it's written is that it talks about modifying the City of Vancouver's own noise and emissions bylaw. It doesn't talk about engaging with the partners, as I heard from Sarah Hicks, with respect to identifying with VPD, for example, or others, or Coastal Health, around what are the current challenges that they may have with enforcement of the bylaw and where might the provincial regulation be strengthened. I'm really not a fan of us continually in Vancouver going against sort of outside of our jurisdiction on work and trying to create new systems for enforcement. This reminds me of the infamous road tax. When I asked the question of then city manager, Sadhu Johnson, and I said, do we actually have the ability to fine? And the answer was, well, no, we'd have to come up with some technology and maybe we'd have to beam cars and put systems in. And it became apparent that we actually didn't have the legal ability to do it. And I'm really having deja vu here. I'm looking at Division 7A of the Motor Vehicle Act regulation states, no person shall start, drive, turn, or stop any motor vehicle or accelerate the vehicle engine while the vehicle is stationary in a manner which causes any loud and unnecessary noise in or from the engine, exhaust system, or braking system, or for the contact of tires with the roadway. That's in the provincial legislation. Goes on to say, how loud can your car be in BC? 83 decibels. We are all bound by the Motor Vehicle Act regulations, all of us. The legal limit in BC is 83 decibels for cars and 91 decibels for motorcycles. The regulations clearly prohibit modifying mufflers to increase the noise. So it's there. If it's not working, the question is why. I would want to ask the partners who are involved in the enforcement based on the originating legislation, which is provincial, why not? And how can we fix it, as opposed to let's create a made in Vancouver, something new yet again, solution to figure out how we can actually monitor and move it forward. So I appreciate this, applaud the sentiment. I want to deal with the issue, but I want to do it in, I think, which is a smart way without creating yet another Vancouver regulatory layer. In addition to what is already there, let's make what's there work and work with partners, VPD, province, and others to do that. So I can't support the amendment as it's currently written. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Klassen to the amendment.
Yes, thanks very much. I actually have an amendment to the amendment, so maybe we can go into the...
Great, do we have a seconder?
Second.
Second by Councillor Kirby-Young. Okay, over to the amendment 2Q, please. Councillor Klassen.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. And again, in the spirit of appreciating exactly what Councillor Boyle's intention is here, and but I also recognize that Boundary Road, a vehicle can cross from across Boundary Road and be sort of facing different laws or bylaws around noise. We don't, from hearing from staff, we just realized that we do have very limited tools. We have limited enforcement tools. I think having this awareness is something that is more broadly, that is more of a provincial concern. And I really do think that this council can bring this forward as an advocacy piece, working with Coastal Health potentially to talk specifically about the health and other mental health concerns that come from noise in our kind of more denser urban environment, but also really advocating for the Ministry of Transportation and the province to come forward with new tools to try and look at broadly kind of tamping down that direction that we're seeing with louder vehicles and modified exhaust systems that are really very challenging. I mean, I personally don't have any love for them myself, but there are obviously fans from them, but they're in our dense urban settings. They're just absolutely completely inappropriate. So I'm hoping that council will see this amendment as a way to enhance what is brought forward and potentially be more effective, knowing that we have very limited tools within our city boundaries to manage and enforce this.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Boyle to the amendment.
Thanks. Just to say, I would have preferred we do both. Let's engage with the provincial government and Vancouver Coastal, but also look at the tools in our toolbox, even if they're limited, as Edmonton did. I hear the concern that we take too much on ourselves and also don't want us to be a council that just points elsewhere when there are tools in our toolbox. So I would have preferred both instead of striking it, but happy generally to be giving staff the direction to be engaging in this conversation and coming back. So I can support this change. It is, I think, overall important for us to be saying this is a problem we hear about. This is a problem we want to find solutions for, and look at all the tools across all the toolboxes. How about that?
Great. Councillor Carr to the amendment.
I have to agree with Councillor Boyle on this. It's not an either or in my mind. We have a noise control bylaw. Bylaw 6555. So we do have authority on this matter, and it's not, in my mind, it should not be an either or. We should be working with the province. Obviously, they have jurisdiction as well. So I mean, it's in my mind. In the end, hopefully, we'll get information back, and we'll be able to change our bylaw if that's the appropriate way to go in terms of the control of this noise. But so yeah, I think it's too bad that that there is a dropping of our area of jurisdiction and responsibility in this amendment to the amendment.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Carr. I'm just going to only add my own little comment here, which is to say on behalf of all the various motorcyclists that I know out there, I appreciate that there's a distinction here between vehicles and motorcyclists. There's a popular narrative that says loud pipes save lives. And I just think that that's an important part of the conversation moving forward to reflect that. Moving on I see the city manager standing up though with.
Thanks, Chair. If I may, just want to ensure that we're clear on what the direction is, because what I'm hearing the discussion of this motion or this amendment may not be consistent with how I'm reading it. Right now, it directs staff to engage with the provincial government and Vancouver Coastal Health to advocate for new tools to strengthen enforcing the city's existing bylaw, which is not what I understood. I thought the direction was to advocate for the province to strengthen their regulations. So I just want to make sure we're clear on what we're being asked to do here. Thank you.
I don't.
Clarification purposes.
Councillor Klassen, advance Councillor Klassen to the queue, please.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I think that it has to be clear that this is the bylaws, the provincial bylaws, not the city's own bylaws on this one. So how we can change that. Strengthening, enforcing vehicle noise and emissions. Maybe just change it to provincial vehicle noise and emissions bylaws.
Councillor, I'm going to need you to submit that. So,
Okay.
One
moment.
Can we take a moment to recess, a 1 minute recess?
1 minute recess.
Type faster, Mike.
Yeah.
Noting nobody else gets to leave.
Yeah. And I'm sending now.
Okay, that's our 1 minute recess. Councillor Klassen is on the queue and a new amendment has been submitted. An amendment to the amendment. So actually, procedurally, I think we're going to need to withdraw this amendment to the amendment and then you can resubmit.
Okay.
Works, yeah? Is that
all right. I would be happy to withdraw this and then submit this as a new amendment to the amendment.
Okay, so motion to withdraw the amendment to the amendment, seconded by Councillor Dominato. All in favor? Can we just do it verbally? Yes. Any opposed? Okay, so we've withdrawn that amendment.
I'll need a seconder for seconded by
Okay,
Councillor.
so back on the amendment to the amendment queue with a new amendment submitted by Councillor Klassen. Did you catch all that, clerks? Okay, and seconded by Councillor Joe. Okay. If we just reset the clock on Councillor Klassen's queue, or just go right ahead, Mike.
I've just made the change to enforcing provincial vehicle noise and emissions bylaws.
Okay.
It's not on the screen yet, but.
Okay. Councillor Dominato, to the amendment.
I think we need to either, Councillor Klassen, it either needs to be strengthening municipal bylaws related to motor vehicle noise and emissions or the Provincial Motor Vehicle Act. I think that we just have to clarify. I think we've got, so it's either advocacy around the Provincial Motor Vehicle Act, or we have to have it be more sweeping around advocacy around to support all municipalities around their motor vehicle noise and emission bylaws, because most have some similar bylaws. So I'm just proposing that as a way to bridge here, because I think
I appreciate those comments, yes.
helpful.
I think this might otherwise be out of order.
Yeah.
So, because there is
So
no
I
such
think
thing as a Provincial Motor Vehicle Act and emissions bylaw.
because the original amendment referred to our own bylaws. Bylaw, sorry, to be clear.
Okay, so,
Do you want to recess for 2 minutes just to allow Councillor Klassen to amend?
Change it to enforcing the Provincial Motor Vehicle Act.
okay, so Councillor Klassen, would you like to get on the queue and have request to withdraw this amendment to the amendment? And
we'll withdraw the amendment to the amendment.
all in favor? Opposed? Seeing none. Okay, let's do this again. One more time. Councillor Klassen.
And it has been sent in.
Okay, so we have a new amendment to the amendment proposed by Councillor Klassen. Do we have a seconder for that? Seconded by Joe. Okay, Councillor Klassen.
The new amendment to the amendment is that council directs staff to engage with the provincial government and Vancouver Coastal Health to advocate for new tools for strengthening and enforcing the Provincial Motor Vehicle Act to reduce excessive and unnecessary noise from vehicles and motorcycles.
Okay, anything further to add, or I see Councillor Carr on the queue. Councillor Carr, to the amendment.
Yeah. I just think that, the priority of the provincial government to do this work, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be very high, so I'm not sort of at this point anticipating that there's going to be much that's going to come out of it. So I'd rather have seen the motion stay as is, where our staff could work with the province for sure in terms of their rules and regulations, but to see if we couldn't strengthen our own bylaw in order to enable the VPD to enforce excessive noise. It's a real problem for quality of life for lots of people. So I'm not happy with the amendment that's taken, the series of amendments that have taken place. I think the motion was stronger as is. I'm still debating over whether I'll just abstain, but I think we've lost some momentum here on work that we could have done at the local level.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Boyle, to the amendment.
Thanks. Yeah, I also would be happy to see us using all tools, but don't want to cut out the tools that we have, noting the province has a long list of other work to do, including from us. And so happy to add that advocacy at the provincial level, and of course see those changes more broadly than just our own boundaries, but also be looking at what we can do. And so disappointed that piece of doing what we can do is cut out in this new amendment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Klassen to the amendment.
In response, I'll just say that, I think staff was pretty clear that our hands are quite tied on what we can do with this. I think there's a strong sense from council that this is an urgent, or not an urgent, but a matter of concern that we need to address. And I think that Vancouver Council has a very strong advocacy position to be able to bring this forward to the provincial government. And I think it's incumbent upon us to try and continue to do that. So I hope that we can move forward and try and work with these other agencies to try and get these tools in place. Thanks.
Okay, seeing nobody else on the queue, can we pull up a voting queue for the amendment to the amendment as is on the screen? I can't see it, no. And that passes with Boyle and Fry opposed. Okay. So now we can jump back to the amendment as amended. And a vote on the amendment as amended.
Take me off the queue, clerk, please.
Yeah, we'll get there. Okay, folks, we have the voting queue up for the amendment as amended. Councillor Carr to the amendment as amended. And that passes. Okay. Now to the main motion as amended. Whew. Okay. Thanks for bearing. Yep, we'll just get that sorted out. Okay, we're back on the main queue, and this is to the motion as amended. Seeing nobody on the queue, we can just go straight to a vote then. Looks if we can pull up the... Okay, great, sure. We're going to bring up the motion as amended. Okay, folks, we have the Noise Control Bylaw Review Phase 1 as amended on the screen. And the voter queue is up. The voting panel is up. Okay, and that passes with none opposed. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff. Okay, bylaws. We have 26 bylaws on the agenda for enactment. Council members who were not present for the meetings related to public hearing enactment bylaws must confirm that they have reviewed the proceedings of the meeting if they want to vote on the enactment. Bylaws 5 and 6 were from a public hearing on April 9th, 2024. Councillor Kirby Young and myself were absent for this item at the public hearing and will need to review the proceedings to be eligible to vote. Councillor Kirby Young, have you reviewed the proceedings?
I have and I will.
And my apologies, that was Mayor Sim, not me, that I was referring to, so. And Mayor Sim is not here. Okay, bylaw 7 was from a public hearing on April 25th, 2023. Councillor Montague and Mayor Sim were absent for the item from the public hearing and will need to review. They're not here, so we can move on. Bylaw 8 was from a public hearing on June 11th, 2019. Councillor Boyle was absent for this item at public hearing, and Councillors Klassen, Meisner, Montague, Joe, and Mayor Sim were not on council at the time of the public hearing and will need to review the proceedings to be eligible to vote. Councillor Boyle, have you reviewed the proceedings? Councillor Klassen?
I have and I will.
Councillor Joe? I have. Great. Bylaw 9 was from a public hearing on July 11th, 2023. Councillor Bly is not here. Bylaw 10 was from a public hearing on April 9th, 2024. Councillor Kirby Young and Mayor Sim were absent for this item at the public hearing and will need to review the proceedings to be eligible to vote. Councillor Kirby Young, have you reviewed the proceedings?
I have and I will be voting.
Great. Bylaws 21 to 25 were from a public hearing on July 13th, 2023. Councillor Meisner and myself were absent for this item at public hearing and need to review the proceedings, and I have done so. Bylaws 21, 22, and 23 are subject to approval of bylaw 20. Bylaws 24, 25, and 26 are subject to approval of bylaws 21, 22, and 23. As a result, we will need 3 separate bylaw votes. Would someone like to move the motion to adopt bylaws 1 to 20?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Kirby Young, seconded by Councillor Joe. Councillor, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say yay. Opposed say nay. Great, the motion carries unanimously. Would someone like to move the motion to adopt bylaws 21, 22, and 23? Moved by Councillor Kirby Young, seconded by Councillor Joe. Council, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say yay. Opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Would someone like to move the motion to adopt bylaws 24, 25, and 26? Sorry, that was Councillor Dominato and seconded by Councillor Kirby Young. Council, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say yay. Opposed say nay. Though the motion carries unanimously. The list of approved bylaws can be found on the city's website. Item 11, administrative motions, approval of form of development at 1247 Kingsway. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on this motion? Seeing none. Council, are there any questions to team members? Seeing none, would somebody like to move the motion? Moved by Councillor Kirby Young, seconded by Councillor Klassen. Any discussion? All in favor say yay. Opposed say nay. Carries unanimously. Number 2, approval of form of development 3644 Slocan Street, formerly 3575 Caslow Street. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on the motion? Seeing none. Moved by Councillor Kirby Young, seconded by Councillor Dominato. Any discussion, Council? Seeing none, all in favor say yay. All opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Number 3, approval of form of development 3205 Arbutus Street, formerly 2108 West 16th Avenue. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on the motion? Moved by Councillor Joe, seconded by Councillor Kirby Young. Any questions of team members? Would somebody like to move a motion? Oh, sorry, we've done that. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, that motion carries unanimously. Number 4, approval of form of development 990 Beatty Street. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on the motion? Any questions for the team? Would somebody like to move the motion? Moved by Councillor Joe, seconded by Councillor Dominato. All in favor say yay. Opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Number 5, approval of form of development 1010 Expo Boulevard, formerly 1050 Expo Boulevard. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on the motion? Seeing none. Any questions to team members? Seeing none. Moved by Councillor Kirby-Young, second by Councillor Joe. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor say yay. Opposed say nay. The motion carries unanimously. Number 6, miscellaneous amendments, various land use documents. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on the motion? Seeing none. Any questions for the team? Seeing none. Moved by Councillor Kirby-Young, seconded by Councillor Joe. All in favor say yay. Opposed say nay. That carries unanimously. Okay, number 12, notice of council members' motion. Are there notices of council members' motions for upcoming standing committee meetings? Reminder to please state the title of the motion and the date of the standing committee meeting on which you intend to move the motion, and be sure to send the title and date to the standing committee meeting via email to the city clerk. Seeing nobody on the queue. Okay. No new member motions. Moving on to new business. We have one item of new business on the agenda today. Request for leave of absence as follows. Councillor Boyle for civic business from meetings on June 26, 2024 from 5 p.m. onward. Councillor Klassen for personal reasons from meetings on April 24th, 2024 from 6 p.m. onwards. Councillor Carr for civic business from meetings on June 12th, 2024 from 6 p.m. onwards. Mayor Sim for civic business from meetings on April 30th, 2024 from 3 p.m. onward. May 8th, 2024 from 12 p.m. onwards, and May 9th, 2024 from 6 p.m. onwards. Mayor Sim for personal reasons from meetings on May 15th, 2024 from 3 p.m. onwards. Councillor Joe for civic business from meetings on April 23rd, 2024 from 5 p.m. onwards. Would someone like to move a motion? Moved by Councillor Klassen, seconded by Councillor Dominato. Council, any discussions? Seeing none. All in favor say yay. Opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Council, are there any other items of new business? Councillor Dominato.
I'm just, as circulated, I'm moving a motion under new business, which is administrative in nature, for the reappointment to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Board. And it is simply to meet their timelines for submission. Thank you.
Okay, moved by Councillor Dominato, seconded by Councillor Klassen. Council, is there any discussion? Seeing none, we can move to a vote on this. We can just do verbally, I guess. All in favor?
Okay.
Opposed? Seeing none. That carries unanimously. Seeing no other items of new business, Council, are there any inquiries or other matters? Councillor Dominato, are you on the? Nope. Then Councillor Klassen.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just two quick items, as I know that we're running quite long here. First of all, I just want to, I know that there's been a council meeting since, but I think I was in the chair for Standing Committee and it just slipped my mind, but I wanted to belatedly congratulate Councillor Boyle on her recent success at landing the nomination for Vancouver Little Mountain for the Provincial NDP party, and wish you all the very best. I realize that seeking higher office is something that I think we all have a great deal of admiration for, and we certainly know that you will bring that passion that you bring here to the chamber to any other opportunities that come your way in the months to come. Second item, I just want to also just acknowledge the fact that we are now in the throes of playoff fever here for the Vancouver Canucks, and we're wearing our Canucks gear today and very excited about the playoff run, and wish our home team all the very best. But I also want to know that recognize that we've had a bit of a bumpy history, if you like, with the riots that took place in 1994 and in 2011. 2011. And I know that our staff teams and the VPD and other groups together are working diligently to make sure that we don't have a repeat of that exercise. But at the same time, I just happened to find the original copy of the 1994 playoff report. It's hard to find, but I was able to track it down. But I just wanted to, through you, Chair, to the city manager, just want to, again, with the spirit in mind that we want to have a safe, fun, and enjoyable playoff season here, that maybe you might be able to kind of remark on the work that whether references to these older experiences and documentation are currently being looked at in preparation to make sure that we, again, have a fun and safe experience during the playoff season.
Thanks, Councillor. And certainly, yes, we are very much mindful of the experiences in both 94 and 2011. There was extensive work done, particularly in 2011, a 400-page report that was the outcome of an independent review. The city did its own review, 200-page report. The VPD did its own review. So there's an extensive body of learning that came out of the 2011 incident, which built on 1994. So yes, we are very much mindful of those recommendations, those learnings, and are applying them now. The VPD and Transit Police actually provided a statement to the media availability this morning, talking about preparation for Game 2. And we're working very closely with them as well to make sure that we're monitoring the situation and on top of that, and we'll keep council apprised.
Thank you. That's it, Chair.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Boyle, inquiries and other matters.
Thanks. Thank you for that. Congratulations. I know how badly I would be missed around here. I just wanted to acknowledge that Passover just began, and I know many families like mine are planning meals, chances to gather around the table over this week, and it is a hard time, and those opportunities to sit around the table with friends and loved ones and connect are more important than ever. So, wishing the best to the Jewish community over these next days.
Okay, L'chaim. Thank you, Councillor Boyle. All right, seeing no further inquiries and other matters, maybe we have a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Dominato, seconded by Councillor Klassen. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, that passes unanimously. Council, we will reconvene at 1:30 for in camera, noting that we do have pretty tight on quorum, so just be aware. Thank you.